And so we settle in. You can feel your body beginning to grow heavy in the most pleasant way. In our time together tonight, there is nothing to examine, nothing to understand, only the gentle rhythm of a story. The story of a time when the cure for a simple headache was a little more complicated. Before we drift too far, if you feel a connection to this place, you're welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint in the sand before you continue your journey inward. And if you wish, you can leave a comment below with your city or town, and the time of night where you are. It's a quiet way of knowing we are all resting together in different corners of the world, sharing this moment of peace. Alright, let the shadows in your room grow long and soft. Maybe you could hear the faint sound of your own breathing, and together, let's allow the story to begin. The first thing you notice is the mud. It's not just dirt, it's a thick, greedy paste that tries to pull the leather shoes from your feet with every step. You're walking down a narrow, crowded street, and the cobblestones beneath the muck are uneven, like the teeth of some long-minus dead giant. The buildings on either side lean in towards each other, so close that their upper floors almost seem to be whispering secrets across the lane. The sky, visible only as a thin, grey ribbon above, promises more rain. It's always promising more rain. But the mud and the dreary sky are not your primary concern. Your concern is the headache. It's not a sharp, dramatic pain. It's worse. It's a dull, relentless pressure, a deep and hollow ache that has taken up residence behind your eyes and has refused to leave for 3 days. It feels as though you are wearing a heavy iron helmet, one that was put on you while it was still hot and has since cooled and contracted, squeezing your very thoughts into a slow, syrupy mess. You've tried everything, of course. Everything that a sensible person in this year of our Lord, 1685, yesterday you paid a barber minus surgeon a small coin to let a bit of blood from your arm. The theory was sound. Your headache was clearly a matter of having too much hot, agitated blood in your system. Releasing some of it should have cooled the fever in your head and restored your personal balance. It didn't. It just made you feel dizzy and left you with a sore arm to go with your aching head. You've pressed a poultice of mustard and ground ivy to your temples, which only made your skin itch. You've drunk a bitter tea of chamomile and lavender, which did nothing but make you sleepy, and yet the headache remained, a stubborn anchor in a sea of fatigue. You've even changed your diet, avoiding red meat and wine, as the physician instructed, to calm your choleric humors. Now you're just hungry, and your head still hurts. This is the world you live in, a world governed by the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your health, your mood, your very personality, it's all just a delicate balancing act of these internal liquids. And right now, your balance is short. You pull a small, silver pomander from your pocket, a little perforated ball filled with a fragrant paste of ambergris and cloves. You hold it to your nose and inhale deeply. It's a pleasant smell, a tiny island of sweetness in the ocean of odors that is this city, the reek of the tannery down the lane, the scent of coal smoke, of unwashed bodies, of damp wool and animal waste. But the pomander is a medical device too, meant to ward off the bad air, the miasmas that carry sickness. Its pleasant scent does nothing to shift the iron helmet on your head. Historians, by the way, still debate just how people like you felt about all this. Did the constant presence of filth and decay weigh on your spirit, or was it just the normal texture of life, as unremarkable as the grey sky above? It's a question that's hard to answer. Right now, you don't feel particularly weighed down by the smell of the street, you just accept it as the smell of the world. Your headache, however, you cannot accept. Desperation is beginning to set in. A person cannot think, cannot work with this relentless drumbeat in their skull. You need a real remedy, something stronger, something that the old woman who sells herbal teas on the corner doesn't know about. You need the kind of medicine that is spoken of in hushed, respectful tones. The kind of medicine that costs a bit more than a boiled dirt. You've been walking without a destination, letting your tired feet carry you through the labyrinth of the city. But now as the daylight begins to fade and the lamplighters start their evening rounds, a flicker of purpose guides you. You turn a corner, leaving the slightly wider thoroughfare for an even narrow alley. It's darker here, the leaning buildings finally succeeding in blocking out what little light remains. And it is in this gloom that you see it, A single lantern, hanging from a wrought-iron bracket, casting a small, warm circle of yellow light. It illuminates a wooden sign freshly painted. The sign doesn't have words. It has a picture, intricately carved and painted, a golden mortar and pestle. The universal symbol for an apothecary. A place of powerful, serious medicine. This is where you need to be. The door beneath the sign is made of heavy, dark oak with a small, iron-ring handle. You take a slow breath, the cool, damp air doing little to soothe the throbbing in your head. Then you reach out and pull the door open. The door swings inward on a well-soiled hinge, which is a small but reassuring surprise. A tiny brass bell, attached to the frame by a spring, announces your arrival with a cheerful, delicate jingle that seems far too bright for the dim space you've just entered. The door closes behind you with a soft, definitive click, shutting out the noise and the muck of the city street. The silence that envelops you is sudden and profound, broken only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of a large clock you cannot yet see. Your eyes take a moment to adjust to the gloom. The only light comes from a few tallow candles burning in sconces on the walls and the fading grey light filtering through a large, multi-paned window at the front of the shop. This window you now see is not for looking out but for looking in. It's filled with a curated display of wonders, a large, branching piece of red coral, a strangely twisted root that looks almost human, and several stoppered glass bottles containing liquids of amber, ruby, and emerald. As your vision sharpens, the sheer density of the room becomes apparent. Every inch of wall space, from the creaking wooden floorboards to the dark beamed ceiling, is covered in shelving, and every shelf is packed with jars, pots, bottles, and wooden drawers, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They are a chaotic, but somehow orderly army of potential cures. There are squat ceramic jars, painted with blue floral patterns, tall, elegant glass cylinders sealed with wax, and countless small, dark wood drawers with tiny handwritten labels on them. You take a tentative step forward, your boots making a soft sound on the sanded floor. The air in here is completely different from the outside. It's warm and dry, and it carries a complex perfume that is almost overwhelming. You can pick out individual scents, the sharp, clean smell of lavender, the sweet spice of cinnamon, the earthy aroma of dried roots, and a faint, almost metallic tang that reminds you of a blacksmith's forge. You drift closer to one of the walls, running your eyes over the labels. Most are in a scholarly Latin you can't quite decipher, words like radix mandragorae and aqua fortis, but others are more familiar. One drawer is labeled simply poppy, another willow bark. A large glass container holds what looks like thick, dark honey, its label reading the riak, a famous and complex concoction rumored to be a universal antidote to all poisons. This was mainstream powerful medicine. An apothecary wasn't just a place to buy herbs. It was a sophisticated laboratory whereon nature was distilled into potent, life-saving substances. Hanging from the ceiling are heavy bunches of dried plants tied with string. Mint, rosemary, sage, their brittle leaves rustle gently in a draft you can't feel. But there are other things hanging up there too. In one corner, suspended by a fine chain, is something that stops you in your tracks. It's a small alligator, perfectly preserved, its mouth open in a permanent, silent snarl. It's perhaps 4 feet long, its scaly hide dusty and dark. Why is it here? But its presence feels significant. It speaks of far-off lands of exotic power and mystery. An apothecary in this era often displayed such curiosities as a narwhal tusk passed off as a unicorn's horn, a strange minus-looking fish, or a preserved reptile to signal their worldliness and their access to rare and powerful ingredients from beyond the known world. It was part marketing, part genuine wonder. On the far wall next to a chart mapping the constellations of the zodiac is a detailed anatomical drawing of a human body, its organs and circulatory system laid bare. The connection was obvious to everyone at the time. The body was a microcosm, a tiny reflection of the great universe, the macrocosmist. The movements of the planets influenced your health just as much as the balance of your humus. A good apothecary had to be an astrologer as much as a botanist. Historians are still trying to unravel just where the line was drawn between what we would call science and what we might call magic in a place like this. For the people of your time, and for you standing in this room, there probably wasn't a line at all. It was all one and the same, the hidden knowledge of how the world worked. Your headache is still there, a dull, unwelcome companion. But for the first time in days, a sliver of optimism cuts through the pain. This place, it feels right. It feels like a place where answers can be found. It is quiet, serious, unfilled with the accumulated wisdom of generations. You are so absorbed in your observations, so lost in the forest of jars and symbols, that you don't hear the soft scrape of a stool from the room behind the counter. You only become aware that you are no longer alone when a calm, low voice speaks from the shadows. "Can I help you, sir?" The voice is surprisingly soft, yet it cuts through the thick silence of the shop with absolute clarity. You flinch, startled, your head turning sharply towards the sound. The sudden movement sends a fresh wave of throbbing pain through your skull, and you instinctively raise a hand to your temple. You see him now, stepping out from behind it old cabinet that serves as a counter. He moves with a quiet, deliberate grace, wiping his hands on a leather apron tied over his dark waistcoat. He is not what you expected. H.E.S. younger than the wizened, bearded sage you might have imagined, perhaps in his 40s with a lean, thoughtful face and hair that is just beginning to grey at the temples. His eyes are his most striking feature. They are a pale, clear grey, and they observe you not with a merchant's eagerness, but with a physician's calm, analytical gaze. He isn't just a shopkeeper, he is a man of learning. You can see it in his posture, in the ink stain on his right index finger, in the way he waits patiently for you to compose yourself. You take a step closer to the counter, the rich, dark wood polished to a dull sheen by a century of use. "I hope so," you say, your voice sounding a little hoarse. "I have a headache, a persistent one." He nods slowly, his gaze unwavering. He doesn't offer a quick, easy answer. Instead, he leans forward slightly, resting his hands on the countertop. "Tell me about it." And so you do. You describe the dull, pressing ache, the way it began 3 days ago, the treatments you've already tried, the bleeding, the poultice, the herbal teas. He listens without interruption, his expression unchanging, absorbing your words as if they were ingredients for a complex formula. As you speak, you become more aware of the room's unique scent. You thought you had identified its components before, but now, standing closer to the heart of the workshop, you realize you were wrong. There is lavender, yes, and cinnamon, and something peppery like cloves. But underneath it all, there is another layer of smells. A dry, dusty scent, like a book that has been sealed in a chest for centuries. It's not an unpleasant smell, but it is ancient. It smells the way you imagine it might smell. And there's another aroma too, a faint, fatty, almost waxy note. It's a bit like the smell of a candle that has just been snuffed out, but richer, more organic. There's that metallic tang again, sharp and coppery, like old blood. It's a strange and unsettling combination, and yet it doesn't feel wrong in this context. It feels medicinal. These are the smells of powerful substances, of ingredients that have undergone profound transformations. You are standing in a place where the lines between the plant, animal, and human kingdoms have become blurred, all in the service of healing. Your eyes drift around the apothecary's workspace behind the counter. It is a world of precise tools. A set of brass-balanced scales, so delicate they could weigh a feather, sits next to a heavy stone mortar and pestle. Racks of glass beakers and retorts stand ready for distillation, their curved necks gleaming in the candlelight. On a small, smouldering brazier, a pot of some dark liquid bubbles softly, releasing a thin wisp of aromatic steam. This is the core of the apothecary's art and mystery. He was part chemist, part chef. He didn't just sell ingredients, he compounded them. He followed precise recipes, some thousands of years old, passed down from the ancient Greeks and Arabs. A single complex remedy, like the riek you saw earlier, could contain over 60 different ingredients, each of which had to be prepared and measured with painstaking accuracy. One of the great challenges for historians is trying to recreate these recipes, as the exact quantities and preparation methods were oft unjealously guarded secrets. The art and mystery of the Apothecaries Guild was a very real thing. You notice something else, a detail that seems both macabre and mundane. Tucked away on a shelf behind him, next to a jar of what looks like dried beetles, is a human femur. It's clean and yellowish minus white, polished by handling. It isn't part of a full skeleton or an anatomical model. It's just there, an object among other objects, a tool or an ingredient like any other. The sight of it sends a tiny shiver through you, a flicker of unease that you can't quite name. But you push it aside. This is a place of serious medicine. You must trust the practitioner. You finish your explanation of the failed cures, ending with a sigh of frustration. Nothing has worked. The pain is always there. The apothecary remains silent for a long moment after you finished speaking. He taps a long finger on the wooden counter, his gaze directed at a point somewhere over your shoulder, as if consulting an invisible library of knowledge. The ticking of the unseen clock seems to grow louder in the silence. You wait, your hope and your headache hanging in the balance. Finally, his pale grey eyes meet yours again. The humours are clearly in a state of agitation, he says, his voice low and certain. The bleeding was a correct first step, but insufficient. Your blood is too hot, too active. We need something to calm it. Something to bring a cooler, more stable influence to the seat of the trouble your head. He pauses, then adds, we need a remedy of great power. He says the words great power and great antiquity as if they are ingredients in themselves. They hang in the air heavy with meaning. You are not here for a simple herbal brew. You are here for a cure that carries the weight of history. The apothecary turns from the counter without another word, his leather apron making a soft creaking sound as he moves toward the back of the shop. You watch him go, your headache momentarily forgotten, replaced by a sense of profound curiosity and a little bit of apprehension. He stops in front of a tall, dark wooden lectern. Upon it rests a book of immense size, a volume so large it looks less like a book and more like a piece of furniture. It is bound in dark, cracked leather and held shut by two heavy brass clasps. This is not a book for casual reading. This is an oracle, a repository of knowledge that forms the very foundation of his entire practice. With a grunt of effort, he unhooks the clasps and opens the great book. The pages are not paper but vellum, thick and creamy minus yellow with age. They rustle with a dry, sonorous sound as he turns them. The text is written in dense, black Latin, interspersed with beautiful, hand-painted illustrations of plants, minerals, and anatomical figures. This is the collected wisdom of the ancients of Galen, diacorsized, and the great Arab physicians who preserved on their work. In your time, the newest discovery is often less valued than the oldest authority. Remedies' effectiveness is guaranteed not by experiment, but by its pedigree, by the number of centuries it has been in use. The apothecary runs a finger down a page, his lips moving silently as he reads. You can't see the details, but you can imagine the contents. Recipes for everything from cough syrups made of licorice root to treatments for melancholy involving powdered gemstones. This is a world where medicine is a form of poetry, a system of correspondences and sympathies. A plant with a heart-shaped leaf is good for the heart. A yellow flower might cure jaundice. A walnut, with its wrinkled shell resembling a skull and its meat a brain, is obviously a treatment for ailments of the head. He pauses, his finger resting on a particular passage. Ah, he murmurs, more to himself than to you. The vital spirit, the pneuma. It is not just the blood that is agitated. The spirit that resides within it is disturbed. This is why the simple remedies have failed. He looks up at you, his pale eyes serious. We must treat not just the vessel, but the essence within the vessel. We need a substance that has, for a very long time, held its own vital spirit intact, a substance that has resisted the natural process of decay. As he continues to scan the pages, you catch glimpses of other strange cures. He flips past a page detailing the virtues of bezoar stones, hard, stony concretions found in the stomachs of goats and other animals, believed to be a universal antidote to poison, worth more than their weight in gold. It's a funny little historical fact that the word bezoar comes from a Persian word meaning antidote. They were so prized that a vast trade in counterfeit bezoars, made from clay and hair, flourished for centuries. He turns another page, ignoring a section on the medicinal properties of powdered coral for strengthening the heart. He seems to be looking for something very specific. The trust between a patient and an apothecary in this era is a subject that historians still ponder. Did you, the patient, truly understand the complex theories of humors, spirits, and planetary influences he was working from? Or was it more a matter of faith? And you realize you don't need to understand the specifics. You just need to believe that he understands. You place your faith not in the logic, but in the learned man who commands it. Finally, he stops. His finger is tracing a line under a heading, and this time he reads it aloud, his voice taking on a formal, almost reverent tone. Te corpus humano in us medicum, on the use of the human body in medicine. He closes the massive book. The sound of the heavy cover meeting the vellum pages echoes in the small shop like a judge's gavel. The decision has been made. The ancient authorities have been consulted and have provided their answer. He turns back to you, his expression calm and assured. The logic is impeccable, he says, as if you had challenged him. A substance that has endured for thousands of years, perfectly preserved against the ravages of time. A body that was once the vessel for a great and noble spirit, a king of Pharaoh. Such a substance contains an immense, concentrated power, a vital force that can be transferred to the living. He doesn't name the remedy yet. He lets the description settle in the quiet room. He is talking about a human body. A body that has become a medicine. The dusty, ancient smell in the shop suddenly makes a new kind of sense. The coppery tang feels more pronounced. You look from the serious, scholarly man to the anatomical chart on the wall, to the polished femur on the shelf, and a strange, unsettling understanding begins to dawn in your throbbing head. This is where you have been led. To a cure far beyond mustard poultices and willow bark tea. The apothecary gives you a final, reassuring nod, then turns and walks towards a special section of shelving. It is a cabinet of small ornate drawers, each one labeled with elegant, gilt lettering. He reaches for one near the very top. He reaches up to the high shelf, his fingers finding the small, polished knob of a specific drawer. It slides open with a whisper of dry wood on wood, a sound that seems to hold the quiet of ages. You watch his every movement, a knot of anticipation tightening in your stomach. Your headache, for the moment, is a distant hum, drowned out by a much louder sense of suspense. What substance, what potent and ancient cure, is he about to reveal? He brings down a small, heavy container, not a glass bottle or a ceramic pot, but a box made of a dark, almost black wood, inlaid with thin lines of mother minus of minus plural. It's an object of beauty and reverence, the kind of chest one might use for precious jewels. He places it on the counter between you with a soft, definitive click. The box itself seems to radiate a kind of authority. This is not a common remedy. This is for serious ailments, and for customers who can afford the best. With a practiced, almost ceremonial gesture, he lifts the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of warm, dark blue velvet, is a small pile of powder. It is exceedingly fine, the color of rich, dark earth with reddish minus brown and blackish hues mixed together. It looks a bit like a ground spice, perhaps a very dark cinnamon or nutmeg, but it has no strong immediate aroma. It simply lies there, inert and ancient, absorbing the candlelight. This, the apothecary says, his voice dropping to a near-minus whisper, is the finest mumia, imported directly from Alexandria. The word hangs in the air, mumia. Mummy. You stare at the powder. So this is it. The legendary cure minus all. The medicine that poets and princes have praised for generations. You've heard of it, of course. Everyone has. It's spoken of in the same breath as unicorn horns and philosopher's stones. But to see it here, laid out before you, is something else entirely. It feels like being shown a fragment of a holy relic. The apothecary can see the awe, and perhaps a flicker of confusion in your eyes. He takes this as an invitation to explain, to share the profound medical wisdom behind this small pile of dust. For centuries, he begins, picking up a tiny brass spoon, physicians have understood that this is one of the most powerful remedies known to man. It is a balsam, a substance that contains a perfect, harmonious balance of elements. Think of it. The bodies of the ancient Egyptian kings were prepared with the most precious spices and resins: frankincense, myrrh, cassia, natron. These substances were chosen for their power to preserve, to halt the natural process of corruption and decay. He gestures to the powder with the spoon. But the true power comes from the vessel itself. A human body, preserved for thousands of years, retains its vital spirit, that essential life force we spoke of. When you ingest this, that ancient, stable, and potent spirit is transferred to you. It pacifies the agitated humus, strengthens your own weakened spirit, and brings your entire system back into its proper, natural harmony. It's a powerful and compelling logic. In a world where everything is subject to rotten decay food buildings, your own body, a substance that has resisted that process for millennia, must contain some incredible secret, some powerful virtue. It's the ultimate preservative, and by consuming it, you partake in its preservative power. This was a core principle of Renaissance medicine, he continues, his tone that of a professor lecturing a favored student. It is a panacea, excellent for headaches and dizziness, as it calms the blood. It soothes coughs, mends broken bones, and is a sovereign remedy against the plague. There is scarcely an ailment that a dose of true mumia will not alleviate. You look at the dark powder, and your mind tries to connect it to its origin. You try to imagine an ancient, gilded sarcophagus being opened in a dusty, sun-minded stretch by the Nile. You picture a body, wrapped in linen, its skin blackened and hardened by time and sacred resins, being broken apart, ground down by a mortar and pestle, just like the heavy stone one on his workbench, until it becomes this fine, medicinal dust. The image is both grotesque and strangely clinical. It's an act of desecration that has been transformed, through the lens of medical science, into an act of healing. One of the great historical ironies is that the original mumia wasn't the body itself. The word comes from the Persian mum, meaning wax or bitumen. Originally, the term referred to the black, asphalt-like substance found seeping from the ground in Persia, which was believed to have medicinal properties. People noticed a similar black, resinous substance inside ancient Egyptian tombs as a result of the embalming process and mistakenly believed it was the same thing. They just scraped the mumia out of the corpses. It took a surprisingly short leap of logic for physicians to decide that if the resin was good, the entire preserved body, saturated with the resin, must be even better. Academics still debate the precise timeline of this transition, but by your time in the 17th century, the meaning is clear. Mumia is the mummy. The apothecary dips the tiny spoon into the powder, leveling it off with a flick of his finger. The dose is small, he says. Its power is concentrated. I will mix it into a draught of wine for you. The wine acts as a vehicle, carrying the medicine swiftly to all parts of the body. He turns to get a small cup, leaving you alone with the open box on the counter. You stare at the dark powder. You are about to consume a human being. A king, perhaps, or a priest, or a noble woman from an age so distant it might as well be a myth. And it is not some barbaric ritual. It is the height of modern, sophisticated medicine. A prescription from a learned man, based on the wisdom of the greatest physicians in history. Your headache suddenly feels very small and insignificant in the face of this ancient, powerful, and deeply strange cure. As the apothecary turns his back to prepare the draught, your mind drifts away from the small wooden box on the counter and travels south, and east, and thousands of years back in time. You picture a landscape of vast, golden suns under a sky of impossible blue. A great river, the lifeblood of a civilization, snakes its way through the desert. Along its banks, colossal monuments rise towards the sun, pyramids, temples, and statues of hawk-headed gods. This is the land of the pharaohs, the kingdom of Egypt, a place that exists in your world as a source of ancient magic, esoteric wisdom, and, most importantly, the world's most sought-after medical ingredient. The apothecary's words echo in your head, imported directly from Alexandria. The phrase is a mark of quality, like saying a wine is from the finest French vineyard. For centuries, a steady trade route has existed, not for spices or silks, but for the preserved bodies of the ancient dead. Ships arrive in the ports of Venice, Genoa, and Amsterdam, their holds filled with a cargo that would seem macabre to a future age, but to yours is simply valuable merchandise. You try to imagine the beginning of this supply chain. You see men, not scholars or physicians, but treasure hunters and tomb raiders, venturing into the Valley of the Kings. They work by the light of flickering torches, their shadows dancing on walls covered in hieroglyphs they cannot read. They are not looking for gold or jewels, though they will happily take them if they find them. Their primary target is the sarcophagus. You picture the moment of discovery, the heavy stone lid of a coffin being levered open with a sickening grind, releasing a puff of air that has been trapped for 3,000 years. The air is dry and filled with the scent of natron myrrh and ancient dust. Inside, wrapped in countless layers of linen bandages, lies the prize, the mummy. The process that follows is anything but reverent. In your mind's eye, you see the bodies being unwrapped, the brittle, yellowed linen torn away. Sometimes amulets and charms are found tucked within the wrappings, small trinkets that are pocketed by the workers. The bodies themselves, blackened and hard as wood, are then broken into pieces, a leg here, a torso there. They are packed into crates or sacks, ready for the long journey north. This was a real and often brutal industry. There are accounts from travelers during this period who describe witnessing warehouses in Cairo or Alexandria stacked to the ceiling with mummified remains. The bodies were sorted, graded, and sold by weight. A whole, intact mummy was a rarity, often sold to a wealthy European collector as a curiosity. For the apothecary trade, however, fragments were all that was needed. Heads, hands, and feet were particularly valued. It's a strange quirk of history that the ancient Egyptians, who went to such extraordinary lengths to preserve the human form for its journey into the afterlife, could never have imagined that their eternal houses would one day become Europe's most exclusive pharmacies. Their painstaking efforts to keep the body whole, to ensure the soul could recognize its vessel, were undone by the very thing they were trying to achieve. The incredible success of their preservation techniques made their bodies medically irresistible to a completely different civilization with a completely different set of beliefs. The better preserved the body, the more potent its vital spirit was considered to be, and the higher the price it fetched in the apothecaries of London, Paris, or Amsterdam. You wonder about the person in the powder. Was it truly a pharaoh? Probably not. The vast majority of mummies exported were not royalty. They were priests, nobles, officials, or even common people whose families could afford a decent, if not spectacular, mummification. The term pharaoh was likely a bit of clever marketing, a way for the apothecary to add a premium to his product. The mystique of Egypt was a powerful selling point. The apothecary returns, holding a small pewter cup. He pours a measure of dark red wine into it, the liquid catching the candlelight like a liquid ruby. He then takes the tiny brass spoon, scoops up the prescribed amount of the dark brown powder, and taps it into the cup. He stirs it gently with the end of the spoon, and the mummy dust dissolves into the wine, turning it a slightly murky, opaque brown. The idea of drinking this is suddenly very real. It's one thing to hear about it, to marvel at the theory. It's another to be presented with a cup containing the physical remains of a person who walked the earth when the pyramids were still new. You think about the Christian doctrine of resurrection, the belief that on the day of judgment, the body will be made whole again. It's a concept central to your faith. How does this practice fit with that? This is a question that theologians and physicians of your time actually debated. The general consensus, surprisingly, was that it was acceptable. Some argued that once the soul had departed, the body was merely an empty vessel, a collection of substances that could be put to good use. Others proposed a more ingenious solution that God, in his infinite power, could easily reassemble the body on Judgment Day, even if it had been ground into dust and consumed by 1,000 different people. Historians still find this theological flexibility fascinating. It shows just how deeply ingrained the belief in corpse medicine was. Even profound religious doctrines could be interpreted in ways that accommodated it. The apothecary holds the cup out to you. His face is calm, professional. This is not a strange or momentous occasion for him. It is a routine medical procedure. Drink it all at once, he advises. The effects will be swift. You take the pewter cup from his hand. It feels cool and heavy, a solid, tangible object in a moment that feels increasingly unreal. You look down at the murky, brownish-red liquid. Small, undissolved particles of the mummy powder swirl in the wine, like sediment in an old bottle. You raise the cup, hesitating for a fraction of a second. The smell is mostly of wine, but there is a faint, dry, dusty undertone that wasn't there before. You close your eyes, take a breath, and drink. The liquid is surprisingly smooth, though a little gritty. It tastes of wine and something else unearthly, slightly bitter flavor that is difficult to describe. It's not unpleasant, just ancient. You swallow, feeling the draft travel down your throat, a warmth spreading from it that is different from the warmth of the wine alone. You hand the empty cup back to the apothecary, a strange sense of finality settling over you. The apothecary gives you a single approving nod. Good, now you should sit for a moment. Let the medicine begin its work. He gestures to a simple wooden stool near the counter, and you gratefully sink onto it. As you sit there in the quiet, candlelit shop, a new thought, a slightly cynical one, worms its way into your mind. You recall the apothecary's careful phrasing, the finest mummy imported directly from Alexandria. How could he be so sure? How could anyone be sure? How could anyone be sure? The demand for mummy powder across Europe was immense, far greater than the supply of genuine, ancient Egyptian mummies could possibly satisfy. And where there is high demand and limited supply, a new industry is always born, the art of the counterfeit. The apothecary, perhaps sensing your unspoken question, or perhaps just proud of his trade, begins to speak again, his voice low and confiding. One must be careful, of course, he says, wiping the pewter cup with a clean cloth. The market is flooded with inferior product. Charlatans and criminals, passing off all sorts of horrors as genuine Egyptian mummy. He leans against his workbench, the picture of a scrupulous professional. They will take the bodies of executed criminals, or those who have died of plague or in the poorhouse. They fill the corpses' bellies with bitumen and spices, dry them in the sun or bake them in an oven, and then try to pass them off as the real thing. His words paint a grim picture. You imagine a dark, hidden workshop, not unlike this one, but dedicated to a ghoulish, assembly-line production. Fresh corpses, stolen from graveyards or bought from corrupt officials, being crudely mummified, a grotesque parody of the sacred ancient rites. These weren't bodies that had been preserved for millennia, retaining their vital spirit. They were recently deceased people, often from the lowest rungs of society, who had died in misery or violence. It is a wicked trade, the apothecary continues, his voice laced with disdain. The vital spirit of such a person is not noble or stable. It is agitated, corrupted by disease or a violent end. To ingest such a substance, it would do more harm than good. It could drive a man to madness or worsen the very ailment he seeks to cure. This was a very real concern for physicians and patients of your era. The debate over the quality and origin of mummies was constant. Learned doctors wrote entire treatises on how to spot a fake. They would examine the powder's color, its texture, its smell when burned. Some claimed that true mummy would have a particular, not minus unpleasant aroma, while the counterfeit article would release a foul stench. The irony, of course, is that they were debating the finer points of different types of dead bodies. The question wasn't whether one should consume human remains for health, but rather which specific kind of human remains were the most beneficial. This trade in what work all bastard mummies became so rampant that it actually led to a decline in the use of the genuine article for a time. It's a little minus known fact that the great French surgeon Ambroise Warpere, a man far ahead of his time in many ways, was one of the first to speak out against the use of mummy, not because he found the practice itself barbaric, but because he was so disgusted by the fraud and the ghoulish manufacturing of fake mummies in his own country. He famously wrote about seeing these counterfeit operations with his own eyes in France. But a trained apothecary, your guide says, tapping a finger on the dark wood box on the counter, can tell the difference. We have our sources, trusted merchants who deal only with reputable excavators in Egypt. It costs a great deal more, but for a true cure, one cannot compromise on quality. His reassurance is comforting. You believe him. You have just ingested his expensive, high-quality prescription. As you sit there, you notice a subtle shift within yourself. The relentless pressing weight in your head seems to be lessening. The iron helmet feels at a loose shelf. The dull ache is beginning to recede, replaced by a feeling of calm and a gentle, spreading warmth. Is it the medicine? Is the vital spirit of a long-minus dead Egyptian noble even now pacifying your agitated humors? Or is it the wine? Or is it simply the profound, unshakable belief that you have just consumed one of the most powerful cures in the world? In your time, the line between chemical effect and what a later age would call the placebo effect is not just blurry, it doesn't exist. The belief in a cure is part of the cure. And right now, you believe. The warmth from the mummy draft spreads through your chest, and the iron helmet in your head continues its slow, miraculous retreat. A sense of quiet relief washes over you. You look up at the apothecary, a silent thank you in your eyes. He simply nods, accepting your gratitude as a matter of professional course. He begins to put away the small dark wood box, its job for the day apparently done. As he turns to place it back in its high, hallowed drawer, your gaze wanders across his shelves again, no longer searching for a cure, but now just idly observing. Your eyes, now free from the dull prison of your headache, seem to notice details you had missed before. You see the neat rows of bottles containing tinctures and oils, the carefully bundled herbs, the mysterious alligator hanging in the corner. And then your eyes land on us again. The object you had briefly noticed when you first came in. On a shelf behind the counter, positioned with a strange sort of prominence, sits a human skull. It is not a medical model made of wax or plaster. It is unmistakably real. It is clean, polished to a soft ivory sheen, the bone showing a network of fine, dark lines like cracks in old porcelain. The jaw is missing, but the upper row of teeth is mostly intact, grinning a fixed, empty smile into the candlelit room. It isn't presented in a ghoulish way. It isn't a trophy or a warning. It sits there matter minus of minus factly, nestled between a large jar of what looks like honey and a block of beeswax, as if it were just another tool of the trade. Now that the mummy powder has opened your mind to the strange possibilities of this medical world, you look at the skull with new eyes. Before, it was a slightly unsettling curiosity. Now you suspect it is something more. You realize that the mummy, for all its exotic power, was not the only human ingredient in this room. It was just the most famous. The apothecary sees where you are looking. He closes the drawer containing the mummy and turns back to the counter, following your gaze to the polished cranium on his shelf. He shows no surprise or discomfort. "Ah," he says, his voice taking on that familiar, instructive tone. "You are admiring my cranium humanum. A fine specimen, is it not?" He reaches up and takes the skull from the shelf with a casual, practiced ease, as if picking up a teacup. He holds it in one hand, turning it over to admire its form, its perfect, domed shape. The empty eye sockets seem to watch you with a dark, hollow intelligence. The mummy is an excellent general tonic, he explains, a harmonizing agent for the entire system. But for ailment specifically of the head, for apoplexy, for the falling sickness, for persistent headaches such as yours, there is no remedy more direct, more potent, than that which is prepared from the skull. He places the skull on the counter in front of you. It makes a soft, solid clack on the polished wood. Up close, it seems both incredibly intimate and profoundly alien. You can see the sutures, the delicate, zigzagging lines where the plates of the bone fuse together in infancy. You are looking at the literal of a human consciousness. Someone lived inside this sphere of bone. They had thoughts, memories, and perhaps, on occasion, a headache. Think of the doctrine of signatures, the apothecary says, tapping a finger gently on the skull's forehead. It is one of God's great gifts to mankind, a key to understanding the virtues of all things. The shape and nature of a substance reveals its purpose. A plant with a leaf shaped like a liver is good for ailments of the liver. The hard shell of a walnut protects a meat that resembles the brain, so walnuts are good for the brain. He pauses, letting the logic build, more divinely indicated cure for an affliction of the head than the head itself. This was the principle of like cures like, a cornerstone of medical thinking that had persisted for centuries. It was simple, elegant, and deeply intuitive. To cure a headache, you used a head, To treat epilepsy, a disease believed to originate in the brain, you used the brain or the skull that contained it. To stop a hemorrhage, you used a substance the color of blood, or even blood itself. It was a form of sympathetic magic woven so deeply into the fabric of medicine that no one even thought of it as magic. It was simply science. It's a curious piece of history that some scholars argue this very principle laid the groundwork for the later development of inoculation and vaccination, the idea of using a small part of a disease to cure the disease itself. It's a controversial link, but it shows how these ancient, seemingly strange ideas could sometimes contain the seeds of future scientific breakthroughs. You look at the skull, then back at the apothecary. A question forms in your mind, a question that feels both logical and absurd. So you grind it up, like the mummy. The apothecary smiles, a rare and fleeting expression on his serious face. Precisely, he says. We call it cranium raspatum, scraped skull, a fine powder, taken in wine or water. It is a sovereign remedy for all convulsions and disorders of the brain. The empty, grinning skull on the counter seems to silently agree. The apothecary's words, like cures echo in the quiet shop, settling over you with the force of an ancient and irrefutable truth. The logic is so simple, so beautifully symmetrical. A head for a head. You look at the polished skull on the counter, its empty gaze seeming to hold the secret of your own relief. The last vestiges of your headache are melting away, and in their place, a deep and slightly unnerving clarity is dawning. You are beginning to understand the fundamental grammar of this world's medicine. It is the seat of the rational soul. The apothecary continues, tapping the skull again for emphasis. His touch is not ghoulish, but proprietary, like a craftsman apping a well-made piece of furniture. The brain itself is too soft, too corruptible. It is a thing of phlegm and water. But the bone that houses it, the cranium, this is different. It is hard, durable. It holds the echo, the very essence, of the rational spirit that once resided within it. That is the source of its power. He is drawing a fine but crucial distinction. The medicine is not the soft tissue, but the durable structure. This wasn't just a matter of practicality, it was deep philosophy. The skull was a vessel of intellect and spirit, and its physical properties, its hardness, its endurance were seen as a manifestation of its metaphysical virtues. When you consumed the powder, you weren't just ingesting calcium phosphate, you were ingesting a physical piece of the idea of rationality and stability. And it must be the skull of a man, he adds, his tone becoming even more specific, and preferably a man who has died a sudden, violent death. Not one who has wasted away from some long sickness. This new detail sends a small, cold ripple through the warm relief you've been feeling. Why a violent death? You ask, your curiosity overpowering your apprehension. Because a long illness corrupts the body and weakens the vital spirit, he explains patiently, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The medicinal virtues are diminished, dissipated by the sickness. But a healthy man, cut down in his prime, his spirit is still strong, still concentrated in his body at the moment of death. It has not had time to fade. His physical substance is therefore at its most potent. He picks up the skull again, holding it up to the candlelight. This one, for example, he says, with a hint of professional pride. This came from a young man, a soldier, healthy, strong, and met a swift end. The very best quality. You stare at the skull, which now has a history. It wasn't an anonymous ancient, it was a young soldier. You try to picture him, a man full of life and vigor, his head full of thoughts of home, or glory, or his next meal. And now his skull, the vessel of all that life, sits here on an apothecary's counter, praised for its medicinal potency because of the very swiftness of his demise. It is a chillingly practical, utterly unsentimental view of life and death. This belief in the power of a violent death was incredibly widespread and had some very specific consequences. The remains of soldiers who died in battle were highly prized. So were those of executed criminals. In fact, for apothecaries who weren't near a recent battlefield, the public executioner was the most reliable supplier of fresh, high-quality ingredients. The idea seems to spark another thought in the apothecary's mind. He puts the skull back on its shelf with a soft click and turns to a different set of drawers, ones that are longer and flatter than the others. The The skull is not the only part of the head with virtue, he says, pulling one of the drawers open. The sound is a dry, sandy scrape. There is a curious and powerful substance that sometimes grows upon the skull long after death. He brings a small, open minus-stocked wooden box over to the counter and places it before you. Inside is a strange minus-looking substance. It's a dry, crumbly, yellowish minus-green growth like a patch of lichen or moss. It looks like something you might scrape off an old stone wall in a damp cellar. This is Usney barbota, he says. But it is not the common sort that grows on trees. This is the true Usney, the kind that grows only upon a human skull that has been left exposed to the elements. We call it moss from a dead man's skull. The name itself is a small poem of the macabre. You look at the crumbly, moss-minus-like substance, trying to reconcile it with its origin. You picture a skull, perhaps on a forgotten battlefield, or chained to a city gate as a warning, lying there for months, for years, through rain and sun, until this strange greenish fuzz begins to sprout from the bone. It has an incredible power to staunch bleeding, the apothecary explains. A sympathetic power. Because the skull it grew on no longer bleeds, the moss that grows from it carries that property. You can pack the powder into a wound, or even take a small amount internally, and it will stop a hemorrhage almost instantly. It is one of the great styptics. This is another perfect example of sympathetic magic. The logic is associative, poetic. The skull doesn't bleed, so the moss from the skull stops bleeding. Historians are still fascinated by Usney because it represents a strange intersection of folk belief and scholarly medicine. It was listed in official pharmacopoeia and prescribed by the most learned physicians of the day, right alongside ingredients we would recognize as having actual chemical effects. For you, in this moment, it is just another wonder in this house of cures, another testament to the hidden connections that bind the world together, where a moss growing on a dead man's head holds the secret to keeping a living man's blood in his veins. The strange, yellowish green moss in the wooden box seems to pulse with a quiet, uncanny energy in the candlelight. Moss from a dead man's skull. You stare at it, a dozen questions bubbling up in your now clear head. Where does one find such a thing? You can't imagine the apothecary himself wandering through old battlefields or climbing the city walls to scrape moss from the skulls of executed pirates. Procuring these potent, specialized ingredients must be an art form in itself. As if reading your thoughts, the apothecary slides the box of Usney back into its drawer and gives a small dry cough, a gesture that seems to signal a shift to a more practical, worldly topic. Quality ingredients are the foundation of my profession, he says, leaning on the counter, and acquiring them is not always a simple matter. One cannot simply go to the market and purchase a high-quality skull, as one would a sack of chamolan. He lowers his voice slightly, as if sharing a trade secret. For the very best materials, for the freshest and most potent stock, one must cultivate a relationship with a reliable and discreet supplier. And in this city, there is no supplier more reliable than the public executioner. The word executioner lands with a heavy thud in the quiet room. You picture the man, the hooded figure on a scaffold, an axe or a hangman's noose as tools of the trade. A figure of fear and public spectacle, an outcast who lived on the margins of society. It's a shock to think of this grim functionary as a key part of the medical supply chain. The hangman, the apothecary continues, using the more common, colloquial term, has unique access. The men and women delivered into his hands are almost always young and healthy. They have not been wasted by disease, and their end, as we have discussed, is swift. You begin to understand. The scaffold, the site of public justice and brutal entertainment, was also, from a certain point of view, a place of harvest. When a sentence of death was carried out, a complexioned, often unspoken set of customs and transactions would begin. After the sentence is carried out, the apothecary explains, the body is legally the property of the executioner. It is one of his perquisites, part of his payment for his grim work. He is a busy man, the hangman. He often has more material than he knows what to do with. There's a small, almost imperceptible smile on the apothecary's lips. It's not a smile of cruelty, but of pragmatism. He is a businessman discussing a supplier. So men like me, physicians, barber minus surgeons, we make arrangements. A good skull, intact, can fetch a handsome price. Other parts too have their uses. The fat, the bones, every part of the body has its own particular virtue. You imagine the scene. A public execution has just taken place. The crowd, which had gathered for the grim spectacle, is beginning to disperse, their morbid curiosity satisfied. But some people linger. A surgeon's apprentice with a handcart, waiting to claim the body for a public dissection at the anatomy school, and perhaps a quiet, well dressed man, the apothecary's own assistant, maybe, who approaches the executioner's men. A few coins are exchanged, discreetly. A heavy sack is loaded onto a cart and whirled away through the darkening streets, destined for the back room of a shop just like this one. This was not a black market, not really. It was a grey market, an accepted, if not openly celebrated, part of the city's economy. The practice is well documented. Executioners across Europe made a tidy side income selling the bodies, or parts of the bodies, of their victims. In some German towns, executioners were even given the exclusive right to sell human grease, a popular ointment for aches and pains. Historians still debate how the general public felt about this. Ghoulish indignity inflicted upon the condemned, or was it viewed as a practical way for the criminal to, in death, finally make a positive contribution to society? The truth is likely a complicated mix of both. Of course, the apothecary adds, breaking into your thoughts, the hangman is not the only source. There are others. Men who walk the battlefields after the armies have moved on, or the night soil men, as they sometimes call themselves. He means grave robbers, men who, for a few coins, would venture into the churchyards at night with shovels and sacks, unearthing the recently buried to supply the insatiable demand from apothecaries and anatomy schools. It was a dangerous, illegal, and deeply sacrilegious business, but a necessary one for keeping the shelves of a place like this fully stocked. He seems to sense he has said enough on this particular topic. The finer details of his supply chain are, perhaps, not for his customers' ears. He straightens up, his professional mask back in place. The point, he concludes, is that the substance must be of the proper nature and provenance. The body of a healthy young man who has met a swift end contains a powerful, volatile spirit. A spirit that is especially beneficial for those afflicted with the falling sickness. With the trembling sickness, his voice trails off as a new thought seems to strike him. I thought about another, even more direct and potent application of this principle. The apothecary pauses, a thoughtful expression on his face. He's still thinking about the potent, volatile spirit of the newly dead. The skull powder is excellent. He murmurs more to himself than to you, but its effect is slow, a distillation of that spirit. For the most violent and sudden ailments, a more direct approach is sometimes required. He looks at you, his pale eyes intense. Have you ever attended a public execution? He asks. The question is abrupt, personal. You shake your head. Perhaps you have, out of a morbid curiosity that drew most city dwellers to the scaffold at one time or another. Or perhaps you have found the spectacle too grim, too unsettling to witness. It is a powerful scene, he says, not waiting for your answer. A great theatre of justice. But if you watch closely, after the main event is over, you may see something else. Something medical. He begins to describe a scene that unfolds in the shadow of the gallows. The body of the condemned man has just been cut down. The crowd is beginning to thin. But a small group of people press forward, towards the executioner's assistants who are managing the corpse. These are not the well-dressed apprentices of surgeons or apothecaries. They are poor people, their faces etched with desperation. And they are carrying cups. They are the epileptics, the apothecary says, his voice low and even. Those who suffer from the falling sickness. They believe, and many learned physicians agree, that the most powerful cure for their affliction is to drink the blood of a healthy man, fresh as its pills. The image is stark and shocking. You picture these desperate people, holding out their tin cups or wooden mugs, pushing and shoving to be the first in line. You see the executioner's assistant, for a small fee, making a fresh incision in the neck or chest of the still warm corpse, and letting the dark, red blood flow. You see the sufferers drinking it down, eagerly, their faces smeared with the very substance of a life just ended. The blood, the apothecary explains, his tone shifting back to the calm language of medical theory, is the very river of life. It is the vehicle of the vital spirit. In a healthy man, that spirit is strong and vibrant. The falling sickness is a kind of storm in the brain, a violent convulsion of the sufferer's own spirit, by drinking the warm blood of a healthy, newly dead man. The epileptic introduces a calm, strong, and stable spirit directly into their own system. It is like pouring oil on troubled waters. This wasn't a fringe folk belief. It was a respected medical treatment, prescribed by reputable physicians across Europe for centuries. Roman physicians wrote of epileptics rushing into the gladiators' arena to drink the blood of the slain. The practice continued with little change right up to your own time and even beyond. It was the ultimate, most direct application of the like curiosity, combined with the belief in the potency of a violent death. The blood was seen as a kind of liquid life minus force, a red gold that could be directly transferred from the healthy dead to the ailing living. You try to reconcile this brutal, visceral image with the quiet, scholarly atmosphere of the apothecary's shop. It seems like two different worlds, but the apothecary sees no contradiction. To him it is all part of the same grand system of medicine. The powdered mummy, the scraped skull, the fresh blood, they are all just different formulations of the same core ingredient, the human body. Each has its own specific application, its own level of potency. It is a crude method, I admit, he says with a slight shrug, and there is a great deal of competition at the scaffold. For my more discerning clientele, we have a more refined preparation. He gestures towards a row of small, dark glass bottles, sealed with red wax. Spiritus sanguinis, he says. Spirit of the blood. We take the fresh blood, and through a careful process of distillation in a retort, we separate its purest essence. A few drops taken in wine have much the same effect as the raw draught, but in a more convenient and civilized form. Civilized. The word is jarring. He has taken this raw, visceral act of drinking blood at the foot of the gallows and, through the transformative science of alchemy, has turned it into a tidy, bottled product on his shelf. It is a perfect encapsulation of his profession, to take the raw, chaotic, and often disturbing materials of nature, be they plant, mineral, or human, and distill them into clean, predictable, and respectable medicine. The existence of this practice creates a fascinating puzzle for historians. In a society so deeply concerned with Christian ideas of sin, salvation, and the sanctity of the body, how was this medical vampirism justified? The answer, it seems, lies in intention. It was not done for pleasure or as a savage ritual. It was done as a last resort, a desperate medical act to combat a terrifying and intractable disease. The line between medicine and taboo was a fine one, and intention was the thread that held it together. You look at the neat rows of bottles, then at the space on the high shelf where the box of mummy powder now rests. Your understanding of medicine, of what is possible and what is permissible in the pursuit of health, has been completely transformed in the last hour. The headache you came in with seems like a trivial complaint from a different lifetime. You are now a student in a strange and powerful school of thought, where the boundaries between life and death, healing and desecration, are drawn in very different places than you ever could have imagined. Your mind is still reeling from the image of the scaffold minus side cure when the little brass bell above the door jingles brightly, announcing a new arrival. The sound pulls you back to the present moment, back to the quiet, herb minus scented air of the shop. An elderly man, stooped and leaning heavily on a cane, shuffles in. He is dressed in the fine but slightly worn clothes of a gentleman, and he nods to the apothecary with an air of weary familiarity. The apothecary greets him by name, and the two men speak in low, hushed tones. You can only catch a few words, the usual, the bad night, the tremors. The gentleman seems frail, his hands trembling as he rests them on the counter. The apothecary listens with a sympathetic ear, then turns to a large, ornate ceramic jar on a nearby shelf. He scoops a measure of a dark, thick liquid into a small bottle, corks it, and hands it to the gentleman, who pays with a few silver coins drawn from a small leather purse. The transaction is smooth, routine, and discreet. The gentleman tucks the bottle into his coat, nods a final thank you, and shuffles back out into the darkening street, the bell marking his departure. You watch this quiet exchange with a new understanding. Every jar and bottle in this shop now seems to hold a deeper, stranger story. You wonder what powerful substance the gentleman has just purchased. Was it a tincture of opium to ease his pain? A syrup of distilled herbs to calm his cough? Or was it something else? Something from the apothecary's more specialized inventory? The apothecary seems to sense your curiosity. Once the door has closed, he turns to you, a knowing look in his pale eyes. That gentleman, he says, suffers from the shaking palsy, a terrible affliction. His tremors grow worse with each passing year. He gestures vaguely to the jar from which he just dispensed the medicine. But he finds some relief in his daily draught. He pauses, then decides to confide in you further, perhaps because you have already been initiated into the deeper secrets of his trade by consuming the mummy powder. The preparation is a complex one, he says, but its primary active ingredient is prepared from cranium humanum. Of course, the skull. It treats convulsions, the falling sickness, and now, you learn, the tremors of the elderly. It seems to be the go-to remedy for any condition involving involuntary movement. It is a treatment favored by the highest levels of society. The apothecary continues, polishing an already spotless section of the counter. Indeed, His Majesty the King is a great proponent of such remedies. This is a startling piece of information. You knew these cures were for the wealthy and discerning, but you had not imagined they reached the very pinnacle of the social order, the royal court itself. King Charles, you ask, unable to hide your surprise. The very same, the apothecary confirms with a nod. His Majesty has his own private laboratory, you know. He is a great student of alchemy and chemistry, and for his health, he relies upon a preparation developed by the great physician Jonathan Goddard. It is a spirit distilled from human skulls. They call it the King's Drops. The idea is astonishing. You picture King Charles II, the merry monarch, known for his wit, his mistresses, and his patronage of the sciences, starting his day not with a cup of tea or ale, but with a dose of distilled human skull. It wasn't a secret either. The King's Drops were a famous and highly fashionable remedy. The recipe was even published in a popular medical text of the time, the Pharmacopoeia Londinensis. Anyone with the skill and the right equipment and a good relationship with the hangman could brew up a batch of the king's personal restorative tonic. This single fact demonstrates more powerfully than anything else just how mainstream and accepted this practice was. This was not folk medicine practiced in secret by village witches. It was state-art, royally endorsed pharmacology. Kings, queens, nobles, and high-ranking clergy across Europe were all consumers of corpse medicine. Pope Innocent I was said to have had the blood of 3 young boys administered to him on his deathbed, a treatment that, it should be noted, failed spectacularly. The great philosopher Francis Bacon recommended applying the flesh of a freshly killed pigeon to the skin. This was simply what one did to get the best medical care available. Historians are often fascinated by this royal connection, as it completely upends the modern assumption that such practices must have been the domain of the ignorant or superstitious. In the 17th century, the exact opposite was true. The wealthiest and most educated people were the most enthusiastic consumers of these remedies, because they were seen as the most powerful and scientifically sound. Your common farmer, with an ache, might have to make do with willow bark, but a king could afford the concentrated vital spirit of a healthy young man's cranium. The skull, the apothecary muses, provides a grounding, stabilizing force. The King's Drops are said to protect against apoplexy and to fortify the spirit. A monarch, you can imagine, has great need of a fortified spirit. He glances at the polished skull on his shelf, and you follow his gaze. It seems to have acquired a new, aristocratic dignity. It is not just a cure for the desperate epileptics at the gallows. It is a tonic for the crowned heads of Europe. The strange underground river of this medical tradition flows from the executioner's scaffold all the way to the gilded halls of the royal palace, connecting the lowest of the low with the highest of the high in a bizarre, hidden symbiosis. The poor unfortunate who ends his life in the hangman's noose might, in the end, provide the very substance that keeps the king's hand steady as he signs the laws of the land. The revelation that the king himself partakes in skull-based medicine settles over you, rearranging your understanding of the world. What once seemed a darkened marginal practice is now illuminated by the glow of the highest authority in the land. It is not strange, it is not gruesome, it is the height of fashion. The apothecary, having finished his polishing, seems to follow your train of thought. He gestures broadly at the rows of jars and bottles that line his shop. The skull and the mummy are perhaps the most famous, he says, but they are far from the only parts of the human body that hold medicinal virtue. Every piece of this wondrous machine God has created has its own specific purpose, its own unique power that can be unlocked and applied for the good of the living. His tone is one of deep, almost religious reverence for the human form, not as a sacred, inviolable whole, but as a perfectly designed, divinely inspired collection of useful parts. He is like a master carpenter admiring a magnificent tree, not for its beauty, but for the quality of the timber, the sturdiness of the beams, and the flexibility of the veneers it can provide. He walks over to a different section of the shop, a cooler, darker corner where large, earthenware pots are stored on low shelves. He opens one of the pots, and a faint, waxy, slightly sweet smell wafts into the air. It's the smell you noticed when you first came in, the one you couldn't quite place. He dips a wooden spatula into the pot and brings out a small amount of a pale, yellowish solid substance. It looks like lard or tallow. Human fat, he says simply, holding the spatula out for you to see. Aizung alminis, rendered and purified. An excellent ointment. You look at the smooth, fatty substance. The idea of rubbing rendered human fat onto your skin is, on the face of it, deeply unsettling. But by now, you are learning to suppress your gut reactions and listen to the medical logic. From where? You begin to ask, but you already know the answer. The hangman, of course, the apothecary confirms with a slight smile. It is one of his most profitable by-products. The fat of a healthy, executed young man is considered the best. It is carefully rendered, like animal fat, then clarified and purified to remove any impurities. He sees the question in your eyes. For what is it used? For all manner of aches and pains, he explains. For rheumatism in the joints, for gout, for sciatica. You rub it into the afflicted area. It is warming, unpenetrating. It soothes inflamed nerves and eases stiff muscles. Some surgeons also use it as a base for their salves, mixing it with herbs to treat wounds and sores. The practice was particularly widespread in Germanic parts of Europe, where ointments made from mentioned fat or arms under fat, sinner's fat, could be bought from apothecaries and even directly from the executioner himself. It was a common household remedy, the 17th century equivalent of a tube of muscle rub. The executioner was often the sole, officially sanctioned purveyor of this product, a strange monopoly that made him a figure of both terror and healing. This trade highlights a fascinating aspect of the era's mindset, the complete lack of sentimentality about the human body as a physical object after death. While the soul was of infinite importance, the body was mere clay, a collection of chemicals. If those chemicals could be repurposed to ease the suffering of the living, it was seen as not just acceptable, but logical and deficient. This pragmatic approach is something many historians struggle to fully grasp, as it runs so counter to modern sensibilities about the dead. And it's not just the fat, the apothecary continues, putting the lid back on the pot. He seems to be warming to his theme, eager to show you the full breadth of his craft. He points to other containers. Powdered human bone, not just the skull, but any bone can be used to help mend fractures. The logic is direct, bone helps bone. The heart, dried and powdered, is used to treat palpitations and anxieties. The liver, for afflictions of the liver. The list is long. He has just laid out the entire philosophy of his practice in a few sentences. It's a complete, holistic system, a kind of medical butchery where every part of the animal has a use. The human body is the ultimate pharmacopoeia, a living library of cures, with each organ and tissue serving as a specific remedy for its own corresponding part in a living patient. It is no longer a collection of mysterious jars. It is a storeroom of human components, processed and packaged for medicinal use. The jar of honey next to the skull now seems benign, almost boring. The alligator in the corner, once so exotic, now seems like a mere distraction. The real exoticist, the real power and mystery, lies in the jars containing the mundane, yet infinitely potent, substances derived from bodies that were once just like your own. The apothecary walks back to the counter, a master of his domain. He has given you a tour of his world, a world where the lines between life and death, poison and cure, and body and spirit are constantly being negotiated and redrawn. Your headache is long gone, but your head is now filled with 1,000 new and dizzying ideas. You came in seeking a simple cure, and you have found an entire universe. You stand there, absorbing the strange catalogue of cures the apothecary has laid out for you: fat for aches, bone for fractures, heart for palpitations. It's a system so complete, so internally consistent, that it's hard to argue with, even as every modern instinct you possess screams against it. You wonder where these ideas came from. Were they ancient folk traditions that had somehow seeped into mainstream medicine, or were they the product of learned men, developed in universities and laboratory? The apothecary, who seems to have an uncanny ability to perceive the direction of your thoughts, provides an answer. He gestures towards a small, framed portrait hanging on the wall behind his counter, a picture you hadn't noticed before. It's a woodcut print of a man with a sharp, intelligent face, a slightly unruly beard, and a look of fierce, almost arrogant confidence in his eyes. He is dressed in the robes of a scholar. These are not the foolish superstitions of village healers, he says, his voice filled with a deep respect. This is the new medicine, the teachings of the great Theophrastus von Hohenheim, known to the world as Paracelsus. The name is spoken with the kind of reverence one might reserve for a saint or a prophet. In the world of 17th-century medicine, Paracelsus was a giant, a revolutionary figure who had, a century earlier, taken a torch to the stagnant past and illuminated a new path forward. Before Paracelsus, the apothecary explains, physicians were slaves to the ancient Greeks, to Galen. They believed all illness was merely an imbalance of the four humors. They treated everything with bleeding and purging, trying to rebalance the liquids of the body. But Paracelsus, he taught us to look at the body differently. Paracelsus, a Swiss physician and alchemist who lived in the early 16th century, was a genuine medical rebel. He famously burned the books of Avicenne and Galen, the foundational texts of medicine, for over 1,000 years, in a public bonfire to show his contempt for blind adherence to ancient authority. He championed observation and experiment over dusty old texts. Paracelsus taught that the body is not a sack of liquids, but a chemical laboratory. The apothecary continues, his enthusiasm for his hero evident. And diseases are not imbalances. They are specific invaders, poisons that enter the body from the outside. And for every poison, God has provided a specific cure in nature. The job of the physician is not to bleed the patient, but to find the right substance to counteract the specific poison of the disease. This was a radical, transformative idea. It was the beginning of a shift from a generalized, humoral theory of medicine to a more specific, chemical one. It's one of the reasons Paracelsus is sometimes called the father of toxicology. He is famous for the phrase, "the dose makes the poison." And he understood the power of mummies, the apothecary says, bringing the lecture back to the topic at hand. He saw it not just as a source of vital spirit, but as a powerful chemical substance. He taught us how to distill it, to extract its purest essence, its tincture, to create even more potent remedies. It's true. Paracelsus was a huge proponent of corpse medicine. He didn't just accept the traditional uses, he expanded upon them, applying his alchemical theories to create a whole new range of tinctures, spirits, and elixirs from human remains. He believed that the human body, as the microcosm, contained all the virtues of the macrocosm in a concentrated form. Therefore, parts of the body were the most powerful medicines of all, capable of curing diseases that baffled other physicians. The historical reputation of Paracelsus is a fascinating and deeply divided subject. Some modern historians see him as a charlatan, a bombastic egomaniac whose theories were just as magical and nonsensical as the ones he replaced. Others view him as a visionary, a crucial transitional figure who, despite being steeped in the magic and mysticism of his time, dragged medicine kicking and screaming into the modern age with his emphasis on chemistry and specific remedies. The truth, as is often the case, is that he was both. He was a man of his time, a strange and brilliant fusion of alchemist, physician, and mystic. He was a great and controversial man, the apothecary admits. He made many enemies. The old, hidebound physicians in the universities, they called him a heretic and a drunkard. They drove him from city to city, but the people, the patients whom he cured when all others had failed, they knew his genius. You look at the portrait of the fierce, confident man on the wall. It's easier to understand now how this whole system of medicine could feel so rational, so scientific to the people of your time. It had a charismatic and brilliant champion. It had a coherent underlying philosophy based on chemistry and the doctrine of signatures. And most importantly, it had the weight of authority from great thinkers like Paracelsus, who lent it intellectual credibility and separated it from the world of mere superstition. He provided the learned justification that allowed a sophisticated gentleman or a king to consume powdered scullenge, but like a man at the cutting edge of medical science. The apothecary on the other side of the counter is not just a shopkeeper, he is a proud disciple of this revolutionary school of thought. You gaze at the portrait of Paracelsus, the fierce minor-side revolutionary, and then back at the apothecary, his devoted disciple. A thought, a fundamental objection that has been hovering at the edge of your consciousness, finally takes shape and demands to be spoken. But isn't it cannibalism? You ask. The word feels heavy and clumsy in the refined, scholarly atmosphere of the shop. It's a word for savage tribes in faraway lands, for desperate, starving sailors lost at sea. It seems to have no place here, amongst the precise brass scales in the ancient, leather-bound book. The apothecary's reaction is not one of shock or offense. Instead, he looks at you with a kind of gentle pity, as if you have just asked a child's question about a matter. He seems to have heard this objection before, and he has a ready and well-minus rehearsed answer. "Ah," he says, with a slow shake of his head, "you are confusing the base act of the savage with the refined science of the physician. They are not the same thing. They are, in fact, opposites." He leans forward, his voice low and earnest, as if explaining a crucial distinction that will unlock the entire puzzle for you. The cannibal eats human flesh for sustenance to satisfy his hunger. He eats it as food. It is a profane act born of desperation or barbarity. He is treating the human body as mere meat. He pauses, letting the weight of that last phrase sink in. He continues with a gesture that encompasses himself, the shop, and the entire medical philosophy he represents. Do not do that. We are not eating a medicine. The substance is not cooked in a kitchen, but prepared in a laboratory. It is not served on a platter, but dispensed in a measured dose. The intention is everything. This distinction between eating for hunger and ingesting for health was absolutely critical to the people of your time. It was the ethical firewall that allowed this entire practice to exist. Cannibalism was a mortal sin, a mark of the deepest savagery. Consuming a carefully prepared powder made from a mummy or a skull, however, was a sophisticated act of self-preservation, guided by centuries of medical wisdom. The transformation of the human body part from flesh into remedy through the alchemical processes of drying, grinding, and distilling was what made it morally and medically acceptable. Think of it this way, the apothecary says, picking up his stone pestle. When I take a root from the ground, I do not simply chew on it. I wash it, dry it, grind it into a powder, and perhaps distill its essence. I transform it from a raw crude thing into a refined medicine. I do the same with these more potent ingredients. It is a process of purification. We are not consuming a body, we are consuming a purified virtue, an essence that has been separated from its coarse physical form. It's a powerful argument, and one that clearly resonates with the worldview of your era. The world is a hierarchy, a great chain of being with crude matter at the bottom and pure spirit at the top. The apothecary's work is to help things ascend that chain, to take a physical object and extract its spiritual or ethereal properties. By this logic, grinding up a skull isn't an act of destruction, but an act of refinement. Historians and anthropologists have long been fascinated by this logic. The cultural rules that define what is and isn't food are incredibly powerful, and the idea of medicinal cannibalism or endocannibalism, consuming parts of one's own group, exists in many cultures, almost always framed with a specific ritual or justification that separates it from mere eating. In Europe, that justification was provided by the intellectual framework of medical science. It's a prime example of how a culture can take a deeply taboo act and render it acceptable, even prestigious, by redefining its context and purpose. The savage eats the body of his enemy to absorb his strength in a crude, literal way, the apothecary concludes, placing the pestle back down with a soft click. The physician uses a remedy derived from the body to introduce a specific, balancing principle into a disordered system. One is an act of passion, the other is an act of reason. They could not be more different. He has built an unshakable wall of logic between the two concepts. You nod, beginning to understand. You didn't just drink a powdered piece of an ancient Egyptian. You ingested a harmonizing balsam. You didn't just contemplate taking a dose of ground minus up soldier's skull. You considered taking a stabilizing agent for the rational spirit. With this final, crucial distinction made clear, the world of the apothecary seems complete and unassailable. It is a world with its own language, its own deep seated morality. It is not a world of ghouls and savages. It is a world of learned, serious men, working diligently by their own lights to heal the sick and conquer death, using every tool that God, in His infinite wisdom, had placed in the world for them to discover, even when those tools were the bodies of their fellow men. The apothecary's elegant explanation hangs in the air, a perfectly constructed argument that separates the high science of medicine from the low barbarity of cannibalism. You feel a sense of intellectual satisfaction. The final piece of the puzzle has clicked into place. The moral landscape of his world is now clear. And yet, a nagging practical question remains. You think back to his earlier comments about his supply as the hangman, the battlefield scavenger. These were sources for the recently deceased. But what about the common person, buried with prayers and ceremony in the local churchyard? Surely their bodies were safe, protected by sacred ground and the fear of God's wrath. You voiced the question carefully. You mentioned the hangman, but surely most people are buried in consecrated ground. They are protected. The apothecary's expression changes subtly. A flicker of something less scholarly, more worldly wise passes through his eyes. He begins to arrange a few bottles on his counter, his movements precise and deliberate. Protected, yes, he says, his voice a little lower now. In theory, the churchyard is God's acre. To disturb the sleeping dead is a great sin and a serious crime. The law is very clear on that. He pauses, lining up 3 small bottles in a perfectly straight row. But the law and the sin are not always a sufficient deterrent, especially when a physician or an anatomy school is willing to pay a high price for a fresh specimen. He looks up at you. There are men in this city, he says, who do their gardening at night. The phrase is a euphemism, dark and evocative. Night gardeners. You'd immediately understand who he means. Grave robbers. The men he had alluded to earlier as night soilmen. They were a grim necessity for the advancement of medical science in your era. It is a dangerous and unpleasant business, the apothecary continues, his tone detached and professional, but a necessary one. The anatomy schools need bodies to teach the next generation of surgeons. And apothecaries, we sometimes have need of a specific ingredient that cannot be sourced from the hangman, perhaps an organ, or the body of a woman or a child. This last detail is particularly chilling, the logic of like cures like extended to age and gender. Remedies for women's ailments were considered more potent if derived from a female body, and cures for childhood diseases from the body of a child. This created a specific and ghoulish demand that could only be met by robbing graves. These men, he explains, they work in darkness. They are quiet, and they are quick. They know the watchman's routes. They know which graves are freshest. A body that has been in the ground for only a day or two is ideal. You picture the scene, a moonless night, the only light coming from a shuttered lantern. The silhouette of a church spire against a sky of dark clouds. The sound of a shovel biting into damp earth, muffled by the wind. 2 or 3 men, their faces smudged with dirt, working with a grim, practiced efficiency. The heavy thud of the shovel hitting the wood of the coffin. The squeal of nails being pried loose. The final, grim task of lifting the corpse, often still wrapped in its burial shroud, into a heavy sack. It was a terrifying profession. If caught, grave robbers faced public whipping, imprisonment, or transportation to a penal colony. They were also universally despised. To the common person, their work was the ultimate act of desecration, a violation of the sacred rest of the dead and a deep insult to the grieving family. Historians have found court records detailing the trials of these men, often called resurrectionists, and the public outrage that surrounded their crimes. And they must be careful not to be cheated, the apothecary adds, a hint of professional disdain in his voice. The sextons of the churches, the graveyards they are often in on the trade. A poor family pays for a good, deep grave and a strong coffin. But the sexton knows a night gardener will be coming. So he buries the coffin or nails with cheaper ones that can be pulled out easily. They will even put the body in a cheap sack and bury the coffin empty, delivering the corpse directly to the back door of the surgeon's hall. It's a world of grim, corrupt bargains, a hidden economy that operates under the cover of darkness. The apothecary doesn't condone it, not exactly. He speaks of it as an unpleasant reality of his trade, a messy but essential part of the supply chain. He needs his ingredients. The surgeons need their specimens, and the resurrectionists are the ones who take the risks to provide them. He, the respectable man of science, can keep his hands clean, dealing only with the final, delivered product. He must see a look of dismay on your face, because he offers a final, philosophical justification. It is a pity, he says with a slight shrug. But what is the alternative? Should a surgeon learn his craft by practicing on the living? Should a sick man die for want of a potent remedy, while 1,000 healthy bodies lie useless in the ground, slowly turning to dust? It is a matter of choosing the lesser of two evils. We use the dead to serve the living. His logic is, as always, impeccable from his point of view. It is the cold, hard pragmatism of a man who believes he is fighting a war against death and disease. And in a war, some unpleasant compromises must be made. The quiet churchyard, a place of peace and eternal rest for you, is, for him, a fallow field, a wasted resource. And the men who garden there at night are his grim farmers. The image of the night gardeners and their grim harvest lingers in your mind, adding another dark layer to the already complex world of the apothecary. You realize that nearly every substance in this room has a story, a history of acquisition that is as potent and strange as the remedy itself. The mummy powder from its distant Egyptian tomb, the skull from the executioner's scaffold, and the other fresher ingredients from the local churchyard. All of it has traveled through a hidden network of trade and transportation to end up on these shelves. As you ponder this, the apothecary, perhaps wishing to move on from the unsavory topic of grave robbing, picks up the polished skull from the counter where he had placed it earlier. He seems to want to return to the more scholarly aspects of his trade. We were discussing the virtues of the skull, he says, his tone brightening as he gets back to his area of expertise. I showed you the usni, the moss that grows upon it. But there is another property of the skull, a more subtle one, that is of great interest to the physician. He turns the skull over in his hands, examining its smooth, domed surface. You see how clean it is, how white. This one has been prepared, of course, but imagine a skull that has lain buried in the earth for 100 years. It is not so clean. It is stained by the soil and filled with the dust of its own decay. You nod, picturing an archaeological find, a skull unearthed from some ancient grave, brown and earth minus gate. This dust, he says, tapping the inside of the skull's empty cavity with his finger. The fine powder that a skull becomes after a great long time in the grave. Some physicians believe this dust has a great power to promote sleep. This is a new and surprising idea, not the skull of violently killed, potent and full of spirit, but the skull of the long minus dead, peaceful and returned to dust. The logic is one of sympathy, as with the moss, he explains. The person to whom this skull belonged is in a deep and final sleep. The very substance of their being has become quiet, inert, and peaceful. Therefore, the dust of their remains, when ingested, can convey that same peace and quiet to a patient suffering from sleepstons or a restless mind. It is a gentle soporific, a medicine of quiet. This is a fascinating and less common belief, a piece of what one might call medical folklore that nonetheless existed alongside the more mainstream uses of the skull. It demonstrates the incredible flexibility of the doctrine of signatures and sympathetic magic. The same object a human skull could provide to completely opposite remedies, depending on its history and preparation. A fresh skull from a violent death was a powerful stimulant for the spirit, a cure for convulsions. Decayed into dust was a gentle sedative, a cure for insomnia. The story of the object was as important as the object itself. It is not a remedy I stop myself, the apothecary admits, placing the polished skull back on its shelf. Its effects are said to be mild, and its acquisition uncertain. One cannot simply order 100-year-old skull, but it is a testament to the fact that every state of the human body, from its most vibrant life to its most complete decay, has a corresponding medical virtue. This idea of using grave dust or churchyard mold for healing is a strange little footnote in the history of medicine. Some historians speculate it may have been a precursor to the discovery of penicillin, as certain soil bacteria and molds do have antibiotic properties. It's a tempting but likely anachronistic connection. For the apothecary, the logic was purely sympathetic. Dust to dust, sleep to sleep. His mention of sleep makes you suddenly aware of your own state. The day is nearly gone. The shop is dark now, save for the warm, dancing light of a few candles. The adrenaline of your headache and the intellectual stimulation of the apothecary's strange lecture have worn off, and a deep, comfortable weariness is beginning to settle in your bones. The mummy draught has not only cured your pain, but has also produced a profound sense of calm-and-well-minus-be. The apothecary seems to notice your fatigue. The medicine has done its work, he says with a satisfied smile. The agitated humors are settled. Your vital spirit is at peace. You will sleep well tonight. You have no doubt that he is right. The thought of your own bed, of slipping into a deep and dreamless sleep, is suddenly the most appealing thing in the world. You reach into your purse for the coins to pay him. The mummy powder, being an imported and high-quality substance, is expensive, but as you count out the silver, you feel it is a price well worth paying. Freedom from that relentless, 3-day headache is priceless. As you complete your transaction, one last great question hangs in the air, a question that encompasses everything you have seen and heard in this remarkable shop. How can all of this, the mummy dust, the hangman's skull, the grave robber's harvest, the theological justifications exist in a world so profoundly shaped by the Christian Church? As you place the silver coins on the counter, the sound they make is soft. Metallic clinking seems to echo the tolling of the church bells. You can hear faintly in the distance, marking the end of the day. The sound brings your final, lingering question to the forefront of your mind. All of this strange, powerful medicine, drawn from the bodies of the dead, how does it coexist with the church? In your world, the church is not just a building you visit on Sundays. It is the central pillar of society, the ultimate authority on matters of life, death, and the proper treatment of the human body, which is, after all, made in the image of God. The idea of digging up the dead, of grinding their bones and distilling their blood, seems like it should be the darkest kind of heresy. And yet, here it is, openly practiced in a respectable shop in the middle of the city. You try to phrase the question without causing offense. Does the church approve of these remedies? You ask, gesturing vaguely at the well-stocked shelves. The apothecary does not seem surprised by the question. He sweeps the coins into a wooden roar, the sound final and business-like. He leans against the counter, his expression becoming thoughtful once more. That is a question that learned men have debated for centuries, he says. This is his way of acknowledging the complexity of the issue, a phrase that signals a topic where there is no simple, definitive answer. It is a perfect example of a subject that historians, too, still debate. There was never a single, monolithic church opinion on corpse medicine. There are some, of course, he continues, who raise objections. They speak of the resurrection, of the need for the body to be whole on the day of judgment. They call our practices a desecration, an abomination. He says this with the calm air of a man who has heard these arguments many times and has long since formulated his response. But the more learned theologians, he says, placing a subtle emphasis on the word learned, understand the matter more deeply. They know that God, in his infinite power, is not constrained by the physical state of our remains. He can reassemble a man from the dust of the earth, whether that dust lies in a quiet churchyard or has been scattered to the four winds. To think otherwise is to limit the power of the Almighty, which is the true heresy. This was, as you heard earlier, a common and powerful theological argument. It effectively neutralized the resurrection issue, clearing the way for a more practical use of the dead. Furthermore, the apothecary adds, warming to his defense, they understand that God has filled his creation with remedies for all ailments. He did not intend for us to suffer needlessly. As Paracelsus taught us, the physician's work is a sacred duty, a holy art. We are helping to repair and preserve God's greatest creation, mankind. To use the empty, soulless vessel of the dead to heal the living, is this not a profoundly Christian act? An act of charity, in its own way. He frames his work as a form of sacred recycling, a way of ensuring that nothing God created goes to waste. The body, once the soul has departed, is no longer a person. It is a substance, and like any other substance in God's creation, it can and should be used for the betterment of humanity. This perspective was surprisingly common among the clergy. While the official doctrines on the sanctity of the grave were clear, the day-to-day application of those doctrines was often much more flexible. Many priests and monks were themselves skilled herbalists and physicians. They understood the desperation of the sick, and they were often pragmatic about the means necessary to heal them. It's a little-known fact that many monasteries in the medieval and Renaissance periods had their own collections of relics, the bones of saints, which were believed to have miraculous healing powers. While the mechanism was seen as divine intervention rather than chemical action, the practice of using human bones as a source of healing was deeply embedded in the religious culture of the time. This likely idea of using non-saintly bones for more mundane medical purposes seemed less shocking than it might to a modern observer. You will not find a bishop publicly endorsing the hangman's trade, the apothecary concedes with a wry smile. But you will find that same bishop, when struck by a fit of apoplexy, quietly sending his servant to a shop, just like this one, to procure a dose of the king's drops. The Church understands the difference between public doctrine and private necessity. It's a world of subtle compromises and unspoken agreements. The Church might officially condemn grave robbing, but it rarely investigated what the surgeons at the university were dissecting. It might preach about the sanctity of the body, but it didn't seem to ask too many questions about the contents of the local apothecary's jars. As long as the practice was framed as medicine and not sorcery, and as long as it was conducted with a certain degree of discretion, the authorities, both secular and religious, seemed content to look the other way. The apothecary's explanation has painted a picture of a society that is far more pragmatic, and perhaps more cynical, than you had imagined. The great, imposing structure of the Church, which seems so absolute and unyielding, is, in practice, a much more flexible and accommodating institution, capable of bending its own rules to accommodate the powerful, pragmatic demands of medicine and the universal human fear of sickness and death. The apothecary's words about the Church's quiet pragmatism are reassuring. They suggest a world that, for all its strangeness, operates on a familiar logic of compromise and practicality. It seems that everyone of importance, the king, the physicians, the theologians, is in agreement. The wisdom of Paracelsus is the new gospel, and the human body is its most sacred text, a source of life-saving revelation. You are about to thank him and take your leave, ready to go home to the deep, peaceful sleep he promised. But as you formulate the words, a final, contrarian thought occurs to you. In a world so completely convinced of this philosophy, was there no one who disagreed? Was there no one who disagreed? Was there not a single, solitary voice of skepticism? Was there no one who looked at a jarred mummy or a skull on a shelf and said, "This is all nonsense"? It seems the whole world is convinced of these cures, you say. Were there no physicians who doubted? No one who offered a different path? For the first time all evening, the apothecary's calm, professional confidence seems to waver. A shadow of annoyance, of old intellectual battles fought and fought, crosses his face. There are always doubters, he says, his voice a little sharper than before. Men who lack the vision to see the new science. Men who cling to the old, failed ways, or who are so blinded by their own delicate sensibilities that they cannot see the power that lies before them. He is clearly thinking of someone specific, an old rival perhaps, a physician from a competing school of thought. There was a surgeon, he says, the word surgeon carrying a slight hint of disdain, as if they are mere mechanics compared to the philosophical science of the apothecary, a Frenchman, Ambroise Père, a clever man with a knife, I will grant you. A man who learned a great deal on the battlefield, but he was squeamish. Ambroise Père, whom you heard mentioned earlier, was a 16th-century French surgeon, a contemporary of the great Paracelsus, and one of the most important figures in the history of surgery. Like Paracelsus, he was an innovator who challenged ancient traditions. He pioneered new techniques for treating wounds and performing amputations. But on the subject of corpse medicine, he and Paracelsus were on opposite sides of a valve. Père spoke out against the use of mummies, the apothecary says, his dislike for the man evident. He had traveled in Egypt. He claimed that the mummies we receive are not the bodies of pharaohs, but of common people, often those who died of wretched diseases like leprosy or the plague. He believed that to ingest such a thing was to ingest the disease itself. Père had indeed written scathingly about the mummy trade, based on his own alleged observations. He questioned its effectiveness and highlighted the rampant fraud in the industry, mocking the idea that this wicked drug could do any good. His was one of the first and loudest, high-profile voices to speak out against the practice from within the medical community itself. He did not understand the principle of the thing, the apothecary sniffs dismissively. The power of the preservation, the vital spirit. He saw only the crude, physical substance, and he was horrified by the counterfeit trade, as any decent man is. But instead of seeking out the true, quality article, as we do, he condemned the entire practice. He threw the baby out with the bathwater, as the saying goes. The apothecary's criticism of Père is a fascinating little piece of historical spin. He frames Pére's skepticism not as a rational objection, but as a failure of imagination, a squeamishness that prevented him from grasping the deeper, alchemical truths of the Paracelsian system. And it was not just the mummy, he continues, clearly warming to his critique of this long-dead opponent. He also mocked the use of unicorn horn. The apothecary gestures to a long spiraled horn mounted on a plaque on the wall, an object you had noticed but dismissed as mere decoration. He claimed it was nothing more than the tusk of a sea creature. He had no soul for the mysteries, you see, only for that which he could cut with his scalpel. The debate between the followers of Paracelsus and the more empirically minded surgeons, like Père, is a subject that still fascinates medical historians. It was a clash of two different ways of seeing the world. Père represented a nascent form of scientific skepticism, a desire to trust only what could be directly observed and tested. The Paracelsians, like your apothecary, represented a more holistic, philosophical, and alchemical approach, seeking to understand the hidden sympathies and spiritual essences of the world. In your time, the Paracelsians are still very much the dominant force in medicine, but Pére's skeptical voice is a whisper of the future, a hint of a world where remedies would be judged not by their ancient pedigree or their philosophical elegance, but by whether or not they actually worked in a way that could be measured and proven. You look from the apothecary, the true believer, to the memory of the long-dead skeptic. It is a relief, in a way, to know that this world, for all its consensus, still had room for a dissenting voice. It makes it feel more real, more human. The path of knowledge is never a straight, uncontested line. It is a twisting, branching trail, with passionate arguments and intellectual battles marking every turn. And you are standing right in the middle of one of those contested crossroads. The apothecary's dismissal of the skeptical Ambroise Père seems to settle the matter in his own mind. He gives a final, satisfied nod, as if he has successfully defended his entire worldview against its most famous detractor. The history of medicine, in his telling, is a clear victory of Paracelsian wisdom over surgical doubt. Just as you are about to finally take your leave, the brass bell on the door jingles one more time. This time, the visitor is a woman, wrapped in a dark shawl despite the mild evening. Her face, pale and drawn in the candlelight, is a mask of anxiety. She approaches the counter hesitantly, her eyes darting around the shop as if she is afraid of being seen. She speaks to the apothecary in a voice so low it is barely a whisper. You cannot hear the words, but you can see the pleading in her eyes, the way her hands are clenched together. The apothecary listens with a grave, paternal expression. He asks a few quiet questions, and she responds with a series of quick, desperate nods. This is a different kind of consultation. The elderly gentleman with the tremors was a routine case. You with your headache were an interesting intellectual challenge. This woman, however, seems to be in the grip of a more urgent and emotional crisis. After a moment, the apothecary nods slowly and turns away from the counter, moving towards a different part of his collection. He goes to a small, locked cabinet made of a lighter minus-colored wood, perhaps cherry or maple. He produces a small iron key from his waistcoat pocket and unlocks it. The cabinet seems to hold his most specialized and perhaps most expensive remedies. From inside, he retrieves a tiny, stoppered vial of blue glass. It is no bigger than your thumb, and it contains only a small amount of a fine, grayish powder. He handles the vial with an almost surgical precision, wrapping it carefully in a small piece of parchment before handing it to the woman. She takes it with a trembling hand, pressing it into her palm as if it were a holy relic. She pays him with a single gold coin, a significant sum of money, which she seems to hand over without a second thought. She murmurs a final, desperate sounding thank you and then hurries out of the shop, the bell heralding her departure into the night as suddenly as it announced her arrival. The entire encounter has lasted less than a minute, but it has left a powerful impression of quiet desperation in the room. The apothecary lets out a long, slow breath and begins to lock the special cabinet. He catches you watching him, your curiosity no doubt plain on your face. A difficult case, he says, his voice tired. A matter of the heart. At first, you assume he means emotionally a case of unrequited love, perhaps, or a broken heart. Potions for such things were common if of dubious effectiveness. But then he clarifies, his tone shifting back to the precise language of medicine. Her husband suffers from fits of terror. His heart pounds in his chest like a drum, his breath catches in his throat, and he is convinced he is about to die. It is a terrible affliction of the spirit, centered in the organ of the heart. He gestures with the iron key towards the now locked cabinet. The remedy I gave her is one of the most powerful sympathizing agents we have for such conditions. It is prepared from the heart of a man. You should be shocked, but by now, you are almost expecting it. It is the perfect logical extension of everything else you have learned tonight. A head for a head, bone for bone, and now a heart for a heart. Specifically, the apothecary continues, as if sensing your last question, the heart of a brave and courageous man. A soldier or a gladiator, if one could find such a thing these days. Someone who did not know fear. The sympathetic principle is clear. The courage contained within that heart is transferred to the patient, calming their fearful spirit and soothing the palpitations of their own afflicted organ. The sourcing of such an ingredient is a grim puzzle. A heart, being a soft, internal organ, could not be harvested as easily as a skull from an executioner's block. It would require a full dissection, the kind of work done in an anatomy theater or, more likely, in the back room of a grave robber's accomplice. The high price a gold coin for a tiny vial suddenly makes sense. It reflects the difficulty and the danger of its acquisition. The specific use of the human heart is a slightly more obscure corner of the world of corpse medicine, but it is well documented. The famous Oswald Crowell, a 17th-century chemist and physician in the Paracelsian tradition, included several recipes for heart-based remedies in his influential Basilica Chy Mica. He recommended it not just for heart ailments, but also as a powerful treatment for epilepsy, believing the courage of the donor could overwhelm the storm in the patient's brain. It is a fascinating and poignant detail. The woman who just left did not buy a chemical compound. She bought the preserved essence of a brave man's spirit to give to the husband she loved. In the candlelit quiet of the apothecary's shop, with its strange smells and its rows of mysterious jars, you have just witnessed an act of profound hope, an attempt to heal not just a physical symptom, but a failing of the human spirit itself. Using the most literal and potent means imaginable, you are no longer just a patient or a student. You have become a silent witness to the deep, desperate, and very human heart of this strange and forgotten medicine. The departure of the anxious woman leaves a stillness in the shop, a quiet space filled only by the ticking of the clock and the soft hiss of the candle flames. The apothecary seems lost in thought for a moment, perhaps contemplating the heavy burdens his customers bring to him. He slowly puts the iron key back in his pocket and straightens a few jars on the shelf, the simple, repetitive movements of a shopkeeper at the end of a long day. You feel a sense of completeness. You have seen the full spectrum of his practice, from the mundane to the arcane, from a simple headache cure to a desperate attempt to mend a failing heart with the courage of the dead. You have your answers. It is time to go. You murmur your thanks again and turn towards the door. As you do, you notice something you've overlooked all evening. Tucked away near the entrance is a small, cluttered table, piled high with pamphlets, newsletters, and unbound stacks of paper. It's the kind of table where news and gossip are left for customers to browse. Your eye is caught by a headline on one of the top sheets, printed in the bold, slightly uneven type of a local press. The headline reads, "Mr. Boyle's astonishing new engine. Curious you pick it up." It's a short, one-page report from a meeting of the Royal Society, that esteemed club of gentlemen-scholars and natural philosophers patronized by the king himself. The article, dense with unfamiliar terms, describes an air pump, a device of glass and brass that can create a vacuum, a space with no air in it. It details experiments where a candle flame is extinguished and a small bird dies when placed within this void. The author writes with breathless excitement about what these experiments might mean for understanding the nature of air, of breathing, of life itself. It's fascinating, but it feels like it belongs to a different universe than the one you've been inhabiting for the past hour. The world of the apothecary is one of sympathies, spirits, and ancient essences. This pamphlet speaks of mechanics, pressures, and observable phenomena. There is no mention of humors or vital spirits, and mere physical forces. The apothecary notices your interest. He walks over, wiping his hands on his apron. "Ah, the news from London," he says, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "The new philosophy, they are calling it. All the rage among the gentlemen of the society." There is a hint of something in his tone, respect, perhaps, but also a touch of skepticism, as if he is talking about a fashionable but frivolous hobby. "They are clever men, Mr. Boyle, Mr. Hook," he concedes. "They build wonderful toys. Microscopes to see creatures in a drop of water, telescopes to see the mountains on the moon. And now this air pump." He gestures to the pamphlet. "They believe they can understand the secrets of God's creation by measuring and weighing things, by looking at the world, as if it were a great clockwork." This was the dawn of a new age, what future historians would call the scientific revolution. A profound shift in thinking was beginning to take place, a move away from the world of hidden sympathies and alchemical essences towards a universe that could be understood through mathematics, mechanics, and empirical observation. The men he mentioned, Robert Boyle, Robert Hooke, and their colleague Isaac Newton, were the architects of this new worldview. They do not concern themselves with the virtue of a substance, the apothecary says, and you can hear the critique in his voice. They ask, what is it made of? Not what is its purpose. They can tell you the weight of a man's heart, but they cannot tell you where his courage resides. They are missing the poetry of the world. His statement is a perfect summary of the great intellectual schism that was slowly cleaving his world in two. For the apothecary, a practitioner of the old science, the world was a text to be read for its meaning, its symbols, its hidden correspondences. For the new philosophers, the world was a machine to be taken apart, a mechanism to be understood. It's a historical debate that is still very much alive. Was the scientific revolution a clean break from the magical past? Or was it a more gradual evolution? Many of the early scientists, including Boyle and Newton, were themselves deeply interested in alchemy. Newton, in fact, spent far more time on alchemical research than he did on physics. They were transitional figures, men with one foot in the world of the apothecary and one in the world of the modern laboratory. It is interesting, I suppose, the apothecary says with a slight shrug, his tone suggesting he is ready to dismiss the topic. But it will not help that poor woman's husband. An air pump cannot cure a fearful heart. For him, the new philosophy is an intellectual curiosity, a diverting parlor game for wealthy gentlemen. It has no practical application in his world, the world of real human suffering and the powerful, ancient remedies required to treat it. He is a man standing firmly on the old side of a historical dividing line, and he cannot yet see the tidal wave of change that is beginning to gather on the horizon. He cannot imagine that the world of mechanics, chemistry, and observation described in that little pamphlet will one day sweep away his entire universe of sympathies and signatures, relegating his potent medicines to the dustbin of history as foolish, gruesome superstitions. But for now, in this candlelit room, his world is still the only one that matters. You place the pamphlet about Mr. Boyle's air pump back on the table, the dry mechanical words feeling strangely weightless after the rich, symbolic language of the apothecary's world. His final pronouncement, an air pump cannot cure a fearful heart, seems in this moment like an unanswerable truth. You nod your agreement, ready now to step back out into the familiar world of the city night. As you reach for the iron handle of the door, it opens from the outside, the little bell giving a sharp, almost impatient jingle. A young man, barely out of his teens, strides in. He is dressed in the height of fashion, a brightly colored coat, a lace cravat, and a flamboyant wig of powdered curls. He carries himself with an air of breezy, almost arrogant self-minus assurance. He looks around the dusty, cluttered shop with an expression of mild amusement, as if he has just stepped into a quaint and slightly ridiculous theatrical set. "Good evening, apothecary," he says, his voice loud and clear, a stark contrast to the hushed, confidential tones that have filled the room all evening. "My mother has sent me. She has one of her, you know." He makes a vague, dismissive gesture towards his own head. "Her nervous headaches. She requires a dose of that dusty Egyptian fellow you sell." He is talking about the mummy powder, but his tone is utterly devoid of the reverence and awe that you felt. He speaks of it as if it were a common inconvenience, a foolish old wives' tale that his mother, for some reason, still that his mother. The apothecary's face stiffens. His professional courtesy is still in place, but a cool, formal distance has replaced the warm, instructive manner he had with you. "Of course, sir," he says, his voice flat. He turns to get the familiar dark-wood box from its high shelf. The young man, meanwhile, wanders around the shop, tapping his cane impatiently on the floorboards. He scoffs openly at the preserved alligator. "Good heavens," he exclaims to no one in particular. "Does anyone still believe these old superstitions?" He stops in front of the polished skull on the shelf. Instead of looking at it with wonder or fear, he simply laughs. "And this grim fellow? I suppose you tell your customers he can cure the falling sickness." "My dear man, this is the modern age. We have science now, reason. Dr. Reason. Dr. Wetzi is a matter of exploding spirits in the nerves, not a case of demonic possession that can be cured by chewing on a bone." He is referring to drive. Thomas Willis, a contemporary physician and one of the founders of the Royal Society, a pioneer in the study of the anatomy of the brain and nervous system. Willis and his colleagues were beginning to explain the workings of the body in purely physical, mechanical terms, moving away from the older, humoral and spiritual models. The young man represents the vanguard of this new thinking. He is a product of the coffee houses and the scientific societies, a world where old beliefs are being held up to the bright, unforgiving light of reason and are often being found wanting. For his generation, the remedies of the apothecary are not the height of science, but the embarrassing relics of a superstitious, unenlightened past. The apothecary returns with the mummy powder. He measures out a dose with a stony silence, his movements stiff with suppressed indignation. The young man pays for it with a careless toss of a coin on the counter. "There you are," he says. "Keep the change. Hopefully, this will be the last time she asks for this dreadful stuff. I've been trying to convince her to see a proper physician, one who keeps up with the latest discoveries, but she is attached to her old ways." With a final, condescending smile, he takes the small packet of powder, turns on his heel, and sweeps out of the shop, his departure marked by another loud jingle of the bell. A thick, heavy silence descends in his wake. The apothecary stands behind his counter, his face a thunderous mask. He has just been called a purveyor of dreadful stuff and old superstitions in his own sanctuary. The intellectual dismissal from a long-minus dead surgeon like Amber Pear was one thing. This casual, arrogant contempt from a fashionable young man is something else entirely. It's a direct, personal assault on his profession, his knowledge, and his entire worldview. You have just witnessed a profound historical shift, embodied in the space of a few minutes. You, the patient, came in with a foot in both worlds. You tried the old humoral cures, and then you sought out the apothecary's more powerful parasocion remedies. The apothecary himself is a master of the old world, a world of essences and sympathies. But the young man, he is the future. A future that will have little patience for the poetry of medicine. A future that will demand proof, evidence, a mechanical explanation. Encounter seems to have exhausted the apothecary. The energy has gone out of him. He slowly, methodically begins the process of closing up his shop for the night, snuffing out the candles one by one, plunging the corners of the room into deep shadow. The world you stepped into only an hour or two ago, which seemed so solid, so powerful, and so eternal, now suddenly feels fragile, old, and under siege. The apothecary moves through the deepening gloom of his shop like a man performing the last rites. With a long brass snuffer, he extinguishes the candles one by one. Each flame dies with a soft pop and a final, curling wisp of grey smoke, taking with it a small circle of warm, golden light. The strange and wonderful objects on the shelves, the coral, the anatomical charts, the mysterious jars retreat into the shadows, their power and presence diminishing with the fading light. He doesn't speak. The arrogant pronouncements of the fashionable young man seem to have sucked all the air out of the room, leaving behind a weary silence. The confident lecturer who explained the secrets of the cosmos to you is gone, replaced by a tired shopkeeper whose world has just been casually dismissed as a collection of quaint superstitions. Your eyes, now accustomed to the demons, follow him as he makes his final rounds. He latches the shutters over the large front window, the heavy wooden bar thudding into place, sealing off the shop from the outside world. He straightens a stack of papers on his lectern, the vellum pages of his great medical book whispering as he closes the heavy cover. As he moves behind the counter, your gaze is drawn to the high shelf where he keeps his most prized ingredient, the drawer holding the mummy powder. You notice for the first time that the gilt lettering on its label is faded, the wood around the knob worn smooth from years of use. But beside it, you see something else, a thin, but noticeable layer of dust. Not the potent, medicinal dust of the ancient dead, but the mundane, grey dust of neglect. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes. The young man's mother may still send for it, clinging to the remedies of her youth. But the young man himself and others like him will not. The demand is fading. This jar, once the centerpiece of the apothecary's collection, the ultimate pumming, just another curiosity on the shelf. Its time is passing. The apothecary seems to notice where you are looking. He lets out a long, quiet sigh, the sound of a man resigning himself to an unwelcome truth. Fewer and fewer people ask for it these days, he says, his voice quiet and tired. The old ways, they are being forgotten. People want novelty. They read the newsletters from London. They hear about the latest theories from the coffee houses, and they want the modern cure. He picks up a small, plain ceramic jar from a lower shelf, one you hadn't paid much attention to before. It is labeled with a simple, handwritten script. He takes a pinch of the contents, a coarse, brownish powder, and holds it out on his palm for you to see. "They want this," he says, his voice tinged with a bitterness that is part resignation, part contempt. "Imported from the New World. The bark of a Peruvian tree. They call it Jesuit's powder. It has a remarkable effect on fevers, I will admit. But it is a crude thing. It works on the body like a blacksmith hammering a piece of iron. There is no philosophy to it, no understanding of the humors or the spirit. It simply works, and for the new generation, that is all that matters." He is talking about chinchona bark, the source of quinine. Its discovery and importation into Europe in the 17th century was a medical earthquake. For the first time, there was a specific, reliable, and demonstrably effective treatment for malaria, one of the most deadly diseases of the age. But for the apothecary, it was a profound intellectual disappointment. It didn't fit into his elegant, symmetrical system of sympathies and signatures. It was just a brute fact, a chemical sledgehammer. The success of remedies like sheen cona bark, and later willow bark for pain, would slowly and relentlessly chip away at the foundations of the old medical world. Why bother with the complex and expensive ritual of mummy powder when a simple, cheap bark from a tree could cure a raging fever in a matter of hours? The historical transition away from corpse medicine wasn't a single event. There was no great conference where doctors suddenly declared it barbaric. It was a slow, quiet fading away, a gradual shift in sensibilities, as historians like to call it. Over the course of the next century, what once was the height of medical science began to seem distasteful, then ghoulish, then simply absurd. The rise of the new, mechanistic science, combined with changing ideas about the self, the body, and the nature of death, made the practice increasingly untenable. The poetry of the old medicine was being replaced by the prose of the new. The apothecary throws the pinch of bark back into its jar with a gesture of finality. He has shown you the past, the present, and now a bitter taste of the future. A future where his profound knowledge of vital spirits and ancient essences will be irrelevant. A future where he will be seen not as a learned physician, but as the purveyor of the dreadful stuff the young man mocked. He looks weary, a man out of time, a guardian of a fading world. The shadows in the shop are deep now. Only one candle remains lit on the counter, its small flame casting long dancing shadows that make the room look like a tomb, a museum of forgotten cures. The single, flickering candle flame on the counter casts a small, intimate pool of light, drawing the world down to just the two of you, standing in the heart of the deep, fragrant shadows. The apothecary looks at you, and his face, etched with the weariness of a man defending a dying philosophy, softens slightly. He sees not a skeptic or a fashionable youth, but a patient he has successfully treated. He has cured your headache. That is a simple, undeniable fact. A small victory for the old ways in a world rushing towards the new. Your headache is gone. He asks, his voice regaining some of its earlier kindness. Completely, you reply. And it is the truth. The dull, oppressive weight that you carried into this shop has vanished, replaced by a quiet, peaceful clarity. He nods, a flicker of his professional pride returning. The mumia has done its work. It has pacified the humors and restored your spirit's balance. He pauses, then glances at the jar of Peruvian bark, and then back at you. A new, almost gentle thought seems to occur to him. It's as if, having shown you the deepest and most powerful secrets of his arcane art, he now feels a duty to offer you something from the other side of the art, a gesture towards the simpler, emerging world of medicine. However, he says, his tone shifting, for a common headache in the future, if it is not so persistent as this one was, there is perhaps no need for such a potent and ancient remedy. There are simpler cures. The world is changing. It is a significant concession. He is admitting, in his own way, that the intellectual sledgehammer of mummy powder isn't always required. He reaches under the counter and brings out a different container, a simple cloth bag tied with a piece of string. He opens it, and the sharp, bitter scent of dried bark fills the air. It's a familiar smell, one you've encountered before in less serious establishments. Willow bark, he says, pouring a small handful of the shredded, fibrous material onto a piece of paper. From the white willow tree that grows by the river, a very old and very humble remedy. He pushes the small pile towards you. Make a tea of it. Boil it in water until the water turns dark, then drink it. It cools the blood and soothes the pain. It is effective. For simple things, this is a quiet, profound moment. The willow bark is everything the mummy powder is not. It is local, not exotic. It is cheap, not priceless. It is simple, not complex. It comes from a living tree, not a dead kin. Its use is based on generations of folk wisdom, the kind of knowledge that Paracelsus himself championed, a knowledge based on direct observation of what works. And, of course, a future age will discover that willow bark contains solicin, the chemical precursor to aspirin. They will isolate the compound, synthesize it, and turn it into one of the most common and effective medicines in the world. They will explain its action in terms of enzyme inhibition and prostaglandin suppression, a language of biochemistry that would be utterly alien to the apothecary. But their science will only be explaining what he already knows, that it soothes the pain. In this moment, the apothecary is bridging the two worlds for you. He has given you the old, the powerful, the poetic cure of the mummy. And now he gives you the new, the simple, the pragmatic cure of the willow bark. He is, perhaps without even realizing it, straddling the great historical divide that is opening up beneath his feet. Historians often debate the exact moment the magic went out of medicine. There was no single day. It was a long, slow process of moments just like this one. A moment when a physician, perhaps tired of the complexities and uncertainties of the old system, recommends a simpler, more reliable herbal remedy. A moment when a patient realizes that a cheap cup of bark tea works just as well as, if not better than, an expensive dose of powdered skull. Quiet Choices was a vote for a different kind of future. He wraps the willow bark neatly in the paper, folding the edges with his long, practiced fingers. Take this, he says, a gift for a future day. You accept the small packet. It feels light and fragile in your hand, a humble offering after the profound and heavy mysteries you have been shown. But it also feels like a key, a quiet password, that will allow you to cross over from this dark, enchanting world of secrets back into the simpler, more brightly lit world that is waiting outside. You have your cure, and now you have your prevention. The circle is complete. You hold the small paper packet of willow bark in your hand. It feels warm from his touch, a simple, tangible link to a future you can't yet imagine, a future of laboratories and chemical compounds. You look around the shop one last time. The shadows have conquered nearly everything now. The alligator, the skull, the charts, the rows upon rows of jars, they have all dissolved into a single, deep, and mysterious darkness, their stories and secrets tucked away for the night. Brave flame of the single candle on the counter, casting a gentle, wavering light on the apothecary's face. His face is a map of his world. You see the deep lines of learning, the sharp eyes of the diagnostician, the firm mouth of a man of conviction. But you also see the weariness, the faint, sad lines of a man who feels the foundations of his world beginning to crumble. He is a master of a profound and complex art, but he can feel it becoming irrelevant, like a master calligrapher in the age of the printing press. Thank you, you say, and the words feel inadequate for the journey he has taken you on. You came here for a cure for your head, and you are leaving with a cure for your ignorance. You have looked through a small, dark window into a completely different way of understanding the world, of being human, of facing the great, terrifying mysteries of sickness and death. He simply nods, a gesture of finality. The teacher has finished his lesson. The shopkeeper has concluded his business. He picks up the snuffer ready to extinguish the last candle, the last spark of this world. Sleep well, he says. It is both a professional instruction and a quiet blessing. You turn and walk the few steps to the door. The iron ring handle is cool beneath your fingers. You pull the heavy oak door open, and the world rushes in to meet you. The air outside is cool and damp, fresh with the smell of recent rain on stone and earth. It is a clean, simple smell that washes away the complex, ancient perfume of the apothecary's shop. The sky above the narrow alley is no longer a dull, grey ribbon. It is a deep, velvety black, punctured by a few sharp, brilliant stars. The city, which seemed so loud and chaotic when you entered, has settled into a nighttime hush. You can hear the distant cry of the night watchman calling out the hour, his voice a lonely, human sound in the vast quiet. You take a step out onto the uneven cobblestones, and the door clicks shut behind you. The small, brass bell gives one last, muffled jingle, a final, faint word of farewell from the world you are leaving behind. The circle of light from the shop's lantern is gone. The alley is dark. You stand there for a moment, letting your eyes adjust. The headache is a ghost, a distant memory. Your mind feels sharp and clear, but also profoundly changed. The world you have stepped back into is the same one you left, but you will see it differently now. When you see a funeral procession, you will wonder about the final destination of the body. When you see the scaffold in the public square, You will see not just a place of justice, but a source of medicine. You will not think of a monster in a children's story, but of a king's ransom of potent powdered dust. The willow bark in your pocket is a small crinkling reminder of the bridge between then and now. It is a humble, unassuming substance, but it holds the seed of the future, a future that will eventually trade the apothecary's profound, poetic, and terrifying system for a world of chemical certainties. A world that will gain immeasurable power to heal the body, but may, as the apothecary feared, lose a little bit of the poetry along the way. You turn and begin the walk home, your footsteps echoing softly in the empty lane. You are leaving the apothecary to his shadows and his memories, a guardian of a dying flame. You are walking away from the world of sympathetic magic and vital spirits, leaving it sealed behind that heavy oak door. You are walking into the night, into the quiet, into the gentle, dreamless sleep that is waiting for you. And so the shop grows dark and quiet, its secrets sealed away. The apothecary's world, once so solid and real, begins to soften at the edges, dissolving into the gentle fabric of a dream. You can feel yourself drifting away from the cobblestone streets, away from the scent of old herbs and ancient dust. The heavy, leather-bound books fade, their pages turning into soft, silent clouds. The rows of jars become distant, twinkling lights, like stars in a forgotten constellation. The weight of the day, the weight of history itself begins to lift from you now. There is nothing left to understand, nothing left to question. There is only the feeling of comfort of a journey completed. The story has been told, and its last soft echo is a quiet invitation to rest. Allow the darkness in your room to be as deep and as peaceful as the apothecary's shop after the last candle has been extinguished. Allow the silence to be as profound as the sleep of a king who has rested for 3,000 years. There is only stillness now and the gentle, easy rhythm of your own breathing, carrying you softly, slowly, into the deep and peaceful night. And here my voice will grow quiet, but if you still need its company, it's ready for you in another story. I wish you a silent, star-filled night. Good night.